What's up, everybody? John Maddox here, coming at you with another late night logical, plausible, probable. We're gonna be having an open mic discussion. You never know where we might end up, but I will tell you this: before we're done, we will have put some Evos in their place, because when I'm finished, you done.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this afternoon review live stream. I came across yet another video from the one and only Godless Engineer that I was like, you know what? I was looking for something to discuss that really points out some of the lunacy of the Evo atheist perspective and talking points. And lo and behold, Godless Engineer provided that evidence once again. And this time he went up against a very nice lady. I think probably lives down in Huntsville near where he does, who used to be a systems engineer for NASA and was really pointing out some of the things about, well, systems engineering that really, struck her as evidence in favor of the intelligent agent. And listening to Godless Engineer spew the same talking points when she was just obliterating him was rather entertaining. She did it in a very, very nice way. I think you guys will really enjoy this. And SJ, I think she would be fantastic for you to interview on your channel. I think you two would get along really, really well. But before we get into all that, for those of you who were around last night for the interesting dumpster fire that it was, letting everybody know we got approved finally for memberships. And if I get one more, I actually get to add another emoji. And everybody's seen, got put out some of the new emojis. So if you remember, there's some custom stuff you get to do. And the next member that joins enables me, unlocks another one for me. So you can be a side chat brawler, an evolution destroyer, or an ID gladiator. And those range from like $3.99 to $25 a month. If you decide to get into that stuff, greatly appreciate it. And obviously go over and check out the merch website. Links are in the description if you like any of the crazy t-shirts we got going on. And I'm actually working on a whole new set that'll be coming out here probably first part of next week. But all that is done. Let's get to the fun. And we got to get the specific Godless Engineer overlay going real quick. And then we will dive directly into this review, which it's going to be fun, folks. Okay, so here we go. Let's dive right into this with atheism versus creation, which, by the way, folks, something to consider is, we constantly hear that there is no worldview from atheism. Well, the title of this stream is, Does Atheism or Creation Better Explain Our World? How can that be anything other than a worldview? I'm just saying, but let's go.
Alabama. So it is kind of neat to have this local conversation via the interwebs, right? It is, and I've been an engineer for a long time, and now I homeschool my children and have a ministry. So I appreciate the chance to get to come on and chat with you kind of about different worldview perspectives and just kind of understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah, so it's so great. Now, I'm terribly sorry about this, but one of the common things with live streams is technical difficulties, and they couldn't hear you. They couldn't hear you at first. So could you repeat what your ministry name is and everything like that?
Yes, it's defendthefaithministry.com is my website, so they can go there, and they've got all the links there for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. So they can find me there.
Yes, definitely. Yes, yeah, that's good. Audio is good now. I'm so sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
But so today we're going to be talking about which worldview explains things better or more clearly, or however you want to put it. And we decided beforehand that Catherine was actually going to go first. So Catherine, I will just go on ahead and give you the floor.
Okay.
So my audience is yours.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'm going to share a few charts just to kind of get some visuals as we go through this. So give me just a second as I get those pulled up. Okay, so yes, we decided to kind of discuss this idea of is there a God, and kind of more specifically, which worldview, whether the atheistic worldview where there's no God or the theistic worldview where there is some sort of God, which one would best explain the existence that we have? So the cool thing, especially since John and I are both engineers, we kind of get in that world of ones and zeros, either ors, it's black or white. And that's the thing with God's existence. There either is a God or there's not a God. There's not anything in between. There's not a kind of sort of maybe halfway kind of God. So really the question is, how can we ever know whether there is or is not? And especially when God is not something that we can prove through that scientific method or some repeatable experimentation type of thing. We have to rely on other types of reasoning to really get to a conclusion that best explains the world that we see. And really, it's kind of what we would use in a court of law to prove something, in that realm of beyond reasonable doubt. So we want to kind of refer to that as a presumption of fact. So this is where a fact is going to stand to be true based on a solid presumption, based on how we know the world works. And it's going to stand to be true unless it can be refuted otherwise. So we can't go back and repeat the past and prove the past through this scientific method and repeatable experiment type thing. So even lawyers and jurors and judges, they have to rely on this type of evidentiary reasoning that's really considered this presumption of fact. What is going to be the best explanation to the facts that they're observing? Now, at the end of the 19th century, there's an American philosopher named Charles Sanders Peirce who coined the term abductive reasoning that really applied this to one of the many ways that we can define logic and reasoning. And it's almost like an inference to the best explanation. So in other words, what is the most plausible explanation to the events that are being observed based on how we know the world works? So we're using evidence, we're using the understanding of the limitations of nature and science to look at the observed world and determine what best explains that. So we're going to apply this to the same question of what is the most logical explanation to how the world got here that would explain why this world is here. Now, I am a former engineer at NASA. I did systems engineering there, which, that's just that interdisciplinary field of engineering where you're looking at all the different aspects of the design to make sure it will work together. So specifically what I did was I was checking over the launch vehicle design of the Ares 1 upper stage. So this is quite a while back, but it was to verify all the subsystems on that upper stage were going to work together. So asking questions like, well, is the main propulsion system putting a fluid line right on top of an avionics box, or does the thrust vector control system need power and coding or something that the avionics system is not aware of? So making sure that there's communication, but all these things are going to hook up and connect and function together. But then I also looked at the shipping environment. So once we build this upper stage, we're going to have to ship it around to the Cape for it to be launched. And it's going to actually be in a different orientation. It's going to go through different environments. It's laying horizontal instead of vertical, like at the launch pad. So what needs to be covered? How are we going to lift it? How are we going to stack it? Where do we need access to prep things for launch? So all of these things are what, the systems engineers are looking at and going through to make sure that not just does it launch, but can we get it to the launch pad? Are all these systems going to work together? Now, I think everyone would agree that this clearly involves intelligence, that there is some sort of design effort, lots of design, lots of redesign, lots of communication about design in order for all of these things to come together and work. And that is your solid presumption of fact. Now, you didn't witness it being built or designed. You might not even know a specific person that works at NASA that had something to do with this design. But just because of all the integrated components that have to go in together, that if you remove any of them, it doesn't work. That somewhere there's intelligence behind the system in order to lay it out this way, in order to bring all those components together, to size them the right way, to integrate them, to co-locate them, to make sure they're not interfering with other things. So it's evident that from this launch vehicle, it's not just a random assembly of parts. The vehicle could not have assembled itself. It could not have designed itself. You can't just add one thing on top of each other, right? You couldn't start with the engine and then start adding a structure to it without going back and thinking of all the other systems at play. Because when you add a new component, it might interfere with the previous function that's necessary, or it might preclude the next function that you're stacking onto it. So it has to be an integrated effort in order for all these things to work together. Now, what in the world does this have to do about the existence of God? Well, if there's this same kind of systems engineering that's in biology or that's found in nature, then we're going to have that solid presumption of fact as well, that there has to be some sort of intelligence behind it, bringing these things together and coordinating them so that they'll function. And really in nature, the function is to not die, right? The function is to continue to live and be productive. And so that, again, is that solid presumption of fact. You didn't witness it. You might not have known anything that, how it came together, but you know that there is intelligence involved. There is design. There has to be a designer behind something that's clearly designed, that it can't be incrementally built up from something simple. So when we kind of step back and we take a look, and there's lots of different examples that we can go to, but I think especially kind of making this connection to this launch vehicle, I think it's neat to look at the human body organ systems. So there's 11 different organ systems that all function together to keep the body alive. And then so each one is performing a specific function, but they're all interdependent. And so I'm going to take just a kind of a deep dive into one of these particular systems just to show this kind of interdependency across just the human body. So we're going to start with the circulatory system, which of course the whole purpose of that is to pump blood all around the body. It includes the heart, the blood vessels, the veins, the arteries, and it's really to send that oxygen out to your cells so that they can go and do work. And then it brings the waste products from that work back to the heart to be expelled out. Now, if it's bringing oxygen, of course, it's relying on the respiratory system because, the circulatory system itself cannot get oxygen into the body, but the respiratory system does. And so its function is to bring in that oxygen. And of course, when the deoxygenated cells come back, it has to expel out the waste products of the water and carbon dioxide. So we have this interdependence between the respiratory system and the circulatory system, but both of these are dependent on the nervous system. If we didn't have the brain and the spinal cord and all of the system and network of nerves that go out to these organs and organ systems, then none of them will function. In fact, there's a specific section of the brain called the hypothalamus that's in charge of those autonomic functions, which are those functions that your body does without you having to think about it. You don't have to tell your lungs to breathe. It's doing it for you, but it's sending these signals and it's controlling this, where if we didn't have that brain, then the lungs would be useless. If we didn't have the lungs, then the heart would be useless. But then they're also dependent on the muscular system.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause right here because I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think you will. What I'm about to say will be substantiated by what Godless Engineer starts talking about as soon as she wraps up. Is he's not even really paying attention, nor grasping, nor even recognizing the significance of the point she's making from a biological standpoint, as well as the necessities of all of these things for any kind of system to actually work, be plausible, and to have any kind of functionality, even if there's additional variables you could add onto it. If you don't have the core functions in place, then everything gets kind of annihilated. And I think these are the kind of things that people don't want to, on the Evo atheist side, don't want to actually address. And you say, oh, well, there could have been some simpler version. It's like, okay, cool. In every single instance, show me how you can come up with all of the necessary transitions between every system. And then they want to go down to the microcosm and be like, oh, well, I can come up with some kind of hypothetical for this one protein. It's like, okay, we'll come up with hypotheticals for all of the interdependent proteins that are necessary or even if you're just looking like a scaffolding protein that has, there's 7 other proteins that don't interact with each other than via this one scaffold protein or enzyme that enable, and like these different portions of it are what enables the different binding actions to occur. But without it, none of them happen. So come on, let's go. Don't just say, you can't just say that, hypothetically, there could have been some other version at some point and actually be valid in your position of explaining how the one you're actually observing came to be without actually devising and designing the specific components that could explain it. And these are the things that I think just get completely glossed over and completely ignored by the Evo atheists, especially the ones who are also claiming that their atheism isn't a worldview while saying that they're actually doing a comparison of atheism versus creationism as the explanation. Since per their own statements, the atheism isn't actually the explanation, but Godless Engineer is making that the position and the title of the debate, which I think is kind of fascinating. Quick sidebar. I've also got the links in the description for both her Twitter account as well as her website. Worth a lot to go check out. I was looking at it last night, and she got some great articles there as well. And all right, let's keep going.
Because the heart, after all, is a muscle. It's a very special type of muscle called the cardiomyocytes, where it can actually contract and pump this blood, which is different from how the other muscle cells in our body work. But it's dependent on the skeletal system, because the blood that's being pumped around is actually formed from the bone marrow. And so it is producing the white and red blood cells and the platelets and the plasma and all of those things that your body needs to circulate through to do work. It's coming from the skeletal system. It's also dependent on the urinary system. It's the kidneys that filter the blood, return clean blood back into the bloodstream. And then you're even dependent on the endocrine system, because there's different hormones that can monitor the blood sugar levels. It can even increase your heart rate when it senses that fight or flight mode. So it knows you're about to either fight or run away. And so you need your heart rate to go ahead and go up to prepare your body for that. So all of these things are now dependent on one another, where if you removed one of these systems, the whole thing stops working. Right? You can't just have the body built up with, we'll start with just the circulatory system, and then later we'll add the respiratory system, because none of these things work unless all of these things are here together. So it's really the epitome of the systems engineering design, where all of these systems have to not only have their individual components and be functional as their own system, but they're dependent on all the other systems in order to completely function. So that presumption of fact, the same type of thing that we would apply to that launch vehicle, applies here to the human body, that there's some sort of integration component, there's some sort of intelligence behind this to pull all these pieces together and assemble it so that it will survive, because it can't survive with any one of these things removed. Just like our launch vehicle, if all we started with was just the engine, but we didn't have the main propulsion system, then we couldn't function. It wouldn't get off the ground. You can't have one system and then later apply the next one. You need all of those components there together at the same time. And so you can almost apply the same terminology of our human body systems to the launch vehicle, that we have the engine and we have the circulatory system, which is our propulsion system, and you have the brain, which is your avionics, and you have the rec system, which is your kidneys. So all of these things, you could see a direct application to the systems engineering involved in this launch vehicle as what we see in the body. But it kind of goes a step further, because even if we design this vehicle, you need all of that communicated to someone to go build it. So here we need all the schematics, we need all of our CAD drawings and the blueprints and the diagrams and everything in order to go build this vehicle. And our bodies even have that too. So all living things are made up of cells, and cells are considered the basic building block of all life. And though we have 2 different types of cells, there's one thing in common across all different types of cells, whether it's from bacteria to mammals to reptiles to whatever. They all have to have DNA. And that DNA is actually described as the blueprint of all life. So just like we need those schematics in order to build a launch vehicle, or, I mean, even when you've done those some assembly required projects at home, which I love, by the way, you're totally dependent on those instructions telling you how to assemble it. And if you don't have the right instructions, or if the instructions are hard to read, which granted they usually are, then you end up with a poorly built, non-functional system or furniture or whatever it is that you're building. And so our bodies are the same way. We need that DNA.
Interesting how she is making, the foundational point that you must have both the preceding components and the preceding instructions and logic for their construction, organization, and implementation in order to achieve the end objective of the overall system or systems. And when you really think about it, when you get into 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 interdependent systems you have to account for, that all in some way, form, or fashion are integrating together. And then if you have a overarching control mechanism that is, managing all of these different components, even though they have subroutines, which are then able to manage and subprocess and additional processors that are able to manage things on the micro level. To me, it's truly fascinating when you think about the scale from the molecular up to the organ level and then to the overall body of all the things that are going on that we absolutely take for granted. And yet they're able to work together in, great synchronicity, and the vast majority of the time operate with no problems until, age, wear, and other damage eventually takes them out. However, they also have the capacity for self-repair and reproduction. It's truly amazing when you really contemplate the amount of both information and the engineering that's contained in that information that is required for life to exist. And all right, let's continue.
As a blueprint to go give those instructions so that your body can know, if it's manufacturing a human, it means, 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 heart, and 1 stomach, which is going to be different for another type of organism. And those instructions are stored in our DNA. Now, the presumption of fact then is not just, hey, we have instructions that give guidance to our cells of what proteins to make, but where is that information coming from? When we look at the schematics of a launch vehicle or those, assembly instructions for a project at home, something intelligent behind that had to lay those out. They had to communicate that. And it's information. It's not just data. Data is different. The information is actually informing you what to go do and how to go do it. And that requires intelligence. And so if in our bodies, we have what even secular textbooks would call the blueprint of life, there has to be intelligence behind that level of information that's guiding the body and telling it what to go do. But it really, our bodies take it a step further, because it puts all of that information in code. And I love this quote by E.H. Andrews. He's a professor of materials at the University of London. He says, it's not possible for a code of any kind to arise by chance or accident. A code is a work of an intelligent mind. Even the cleverest dog or chimpanzee cannot work out a code of any kind. So it's obvious then that chance cannot do it. Codes do not arise from chaos. And so that's really, we've got not just information in these schematics and blueprints directing the manufacturing of your body. It's stored in a code. And so that requires a whole extra level of intelligence and an intelligent mind behind it. And that's because of how we know the world works. We know that information does not come out of nothingness. We know that code cannot come out of chaos. And so because of how this world works, that solid presumption of fact is that there has to be intelligence behind this. And we can even see that from this quote from Bill Gates, where he says, human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. So if we can agree that a computer code cannot randomly generate and execute a simple program, then we have to look at the DNA that's guiding the proteins, the RNA, that is a basic building block of all life, is going to be that complex. It's going to be that level of information stored in a code that requires some sort of intelligence behind it. So really the most plausible explanation, because of how we know the world works, is that design and information organized into a code has to come from some sort of intelligent source. And so that's, to me, one of the amazing things about looking at this world, that it's not saying, well, in spite of the information or because we don't have information, we're going to insert God. It's because of how we know information comes from intelligence, that we know there's something intelligent that is putting this information into this universe and doing the systems engineering design of our bodies.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Now, for those of you who've been watching the whole presentation she just did, I mean, it's difficult to not at least concede that she's making solid points, and that would be a rational conclusion. Although, I mean, Godless tries to act like he's sort of, recognizing that, but then it's like being dismissed without real rejection, other than, oh, we know that all this stuff can create itself, when we know that it can't, and that was the point that she was just making. So pay attention, folks, and listen carefully to how Godless Engineer just starts spewing standard talking points and doesn't actually address the underlying substance of her arguments.
Presentation there. So I don't really have anything as formally written, so you're a bit more prepared than I am. But generally, when we're talking about this subject, what I like to point out is that the prior experiences and prior instances of us explaining things with an intelligent creator or God have generally been proven to not require God. And so that seems to be the prior probability, is that anything that occurs in reality seems to be natural, or at least eventually explained through natural processes. And with a lack of evidence to suggest that a God is required for nature to operate, I think that it would take a monumental amount of evidence in order to prove that a God is required for nature to operate. Now, I noticed one of the big points of the presentation that you gave was the teleological argument. And I didn't exactly know, which way you were going to go with your presentation. So I'm just kind of, I'm kind of tailoring what I normally talk about, as I saw that you argued. But as far as the teleological argument goes, a lot of things in nature appear to be designed. Because our pattern-seeking brains recognize what we think is designed in nature. And because of this fact, things seem designed to us. They seem to work as if somebody designed them, but it's actually...
Great point there, Godless Engineer. Things just, quote-unquote, seem designed. Did you miss the entirety of the point she was making is that we can identify things that are designed because we're intelligent agents, and we can identify things that have interdependencies and or are in any other context require the intelligent agency in order to be expressed. That was the point she was making. It's the inference to the best explanation. It is a rational conclusion in regarding plausibility, even if you don't know what the who or what the preceding actions that were required in order for it to now be in the case. You can identify it. And Redefined Living just makes a great point. He says, so he shows up to debate a NASA engineer without anything prepared. What a moron. I agree. It's like you're going up against somebody who was a systems engineer for NASA. At a minimum, you have to assume that a systems engineer has figured out ways to formulate cohesive arguments and components that would be necessary in order to substantiate said, projection or project or plan that has to be authorized by others. And then it's like, oh, I was going to spew some talking points and not actually address things. And it's so amazing how the overconfidence of the Evo atheists on YouTube, it just continues to be on full display. And yet they don't even want to recognize the fact that their arguments are being obliterated. It's really getting entertaining and sad at the same time.
Natural processes that can explain why those things are there. Typically, I try to give this example just as a simple example, and that would be the water cycle. I don't see the need for God in the water cycle because everything happens naturally. There's a natural cause for water vapor to form, from liquid water. It heats up, it gains energy, and it transforms from liquid water to water vapor. It rises up into the air, and then once it's up in the air, at some point it cools down and it forms back into liquid water.
Folks, he's saying that water evaporating and then raining is the equivalent to a system for a rocket. That's what he's claiming in terms of what is necessary. Like, it's truly astounding, the ridiculous level of mental incompetence that is the atheist talking points when their formal, structured arguments are put forth, evidentiary components are levied in support of the intelligent agency position, and then you're going to come back with, oh, the cup falls if I let go of it. Like, yeah, dude, how did the cup get in your hand? That's the question, is how did the cup get in your hand, not whether or not it's going to fall because of gravity. It's so obnoxious listening to this stuff. Let's continue.
And then it rains, and this cycle repeats and it repeats and it repeats, and it's a lot more complicated than that. But just trying to simplify it and point it out how we don't need God to explain rain, but at one point in time in the past, we definitely needed God to explain rain, lightning, any number of natural weather events. We would explain with God. The eclipses were also explained with God. So I can understand the I guess focusing in on the teleological argument, but I find that the teleological argument is very weak because, like, going back to your example of the rocket system, we have background knowledge on the rocket system that shows there's no natural process that would cause a rocket system like that to form on its own. We don't have any reason to think that it just by chance like fell into place like that, which would be a natural process. We know for a fact that people designed it and everything. So it seems like, given the rocket, it's a reasonable conclusion to think that somebody designed it. Now, transferring that to the natural world, if we were to look at like any of the organisms or plants on this planet, we can see like development from simpler biological systems to more complex biological systems. This comes in the form of the fossil record, also with life that occurs here on Earth now. For instance, like with you didn't bring this up in your presentation, but like the development of the eye. The eye is a somewhat complex organ in our bodies, but it's also not perfect, and it's definitely.
He just said the eye is a somewhat complex organ. It is vastly superior to the best cameras that humans have created. Irony of ironies, where our more advanced stuff, we're actually trying to copy the technology and the engineering that's necessary for the eye to operate the way that it does. There's data encoding that's happening in the eye before it's sent into the brain for additional processing. There's so many different facets of it. And the thing that really cracks me up about this is they want to claim that because they're simpler, quote unquote, simpler eyes and, light sensitive devices and such, that somehow that means that none of them required a designer. I mean, like, okay, so you're saying that the flashbang cameras of the 1800s, like, that is because those existed, that therefore the one on your smartphone with 16 megapixels is like just created itself? Like, that's what you're arguing. I really don't know how that makes any sense for anybody. Like, oh, these two camera, I can find a simpler camera. I mean, heck, I remember as a kid, you had the little disposable cameras with like real film. It wasn't digital. I mean, you think about all those things, it's like, I've watched the advancement of them, but I would never come to the conclusion that they developed themselves, even though image processing is an extraordinarily complicated component. And by utilization of magnetism and light capture elements and different chemicals that can process them and render them, like, yeah, through the use of chemicals, you're able to create an image and capture light. But that's not a removal of the necessity, because you can use natural processes for the intelligent agent to enable the execution of those naturally occurring substances in a way that captures light and captures images. It just amazes me how people seem to be unable to grasp the basics of common sense in terms of the end conclusion.
Definitely not the best pair of eyes out there. I mean, you could think of like a hawk's eye that can see vast distances and stuff like that. You have in nature living examples of every stage of the development of the eye, from just collections of photosensitive cells to all the way up.
Oh, and by the way, the whole because the hawk can see further away than us, therefore our eyes suck. It's like, so there's things that our eyes can do that the hawkeye can't, and there's things on the octopus eye that are quote unquote better than ours, but can't be done by theirs, and vice versa. It's like there's all these different specialties for use case. It's like, okay, cool. If I am a paparazzi photographer, I'm probably going to want to have a lens that would enable me to zoom in from really, really far away. However, if I'm trying to do selfies, it really wouldn't make sense to try to attach that same type of lens to my phone. Now, I might use a fisheye or some other kind of lens, potentially add to your phone or to your like small camera, but you wouldn't need a paparazzi lens for distance. That wouldn't make any sense. Now, I'm not flying, at 2,000 feet and getting ready to dive down at a ridiculous speed like a peregrine falcon and be snatching up a mouse as he's running along. Like, it's a totally different context. I don't need to be able to do that. I mean, the fact that it's like, oh, because you can't do this, therefore your eye sucks. Apply the same logic to the phone, the camera on your smartphone versus the paparazzi lens on his $20,000 camera. Like, yeah, just think for a second, folks.
up to, you know, the concave eyes, you know, that we have. And so it seems to me like if you take any one particular organism or like plant, animal, whatever, you can find natural reasons as to why those things developed the way that they did. Now, as far as like you were talking about the interdependency of all the systems in the human body, and of course, if you remove somebody's lungs and you don't replace them with like maybe artificial lungs, or like if you remove the heart or the circulatory system and don't replace those in some kind of fashion, obviously that breaks the system, right? Because the human bodies have evolved to operate with certain things in certain ways. And so if you disrupt that system, then the entire thing goes out of whack, and you know, you end up with a broken, quote unquote, machine, if you will. I know that from personal experience because my pancreas is broke. I have diabetes. And so because my pancreas is broke, I have to supplement it with insulin. Otherwise, I would have died a long time ago. So obviously, if you take out any one system, then it's going to cause the human machine crash. But that doesn't mean that all.
So I'd be very fascinated to know if Godless Engineer's diabetes is a result of like type 1 and he actually has a pancreas doesn't work correctly from his inception, his like childhood, or if his diabetes is a result of being overweight and overburdening the insulin production, and therefore having that issue, which could be resolved potentially if he lost the weight, got back in shape, began to exercise, and then it would be fixed. And if that is the case, then, and you have the opportunity to fix a problem that is self-created, you have a self-generated problem, and then you blame it on the designer that you claim doesn't exist. That would be like saying, I have a flat tire due to driving over nails. I am continuing to drive, and now the rim of my tire is jacked up because I neither put on the spare tire or stopped driving, like, and got it replaced. Like, this is not that complicated. And this is what it's so fascinating in, you know, Western civilization, all this stuff about like diabetes as an example, which is a massive problem in the obese Western civilization. Yet 99.9% of the cases of diabetes are due to people being obese. And if you, within a reasonable amount of time before you like completely burn out your capacity for insulin production, if you lose the weight, almost all of them can be fixed and just go away completely. People would rather inject themselves with insulin rather than fix the problem, and then blame that in the context of, you know, an atheist like Godless Engineer, then blame the designer. Now, I retract all that. If he has type 1 diabetes, I retract everything I said. However, the logic still applies across the board to his analogy.
All organisms or every stage of human evolution requires a lungs or a circulatory system or anything like that. There's actually one type of salamander that doesn't have lungs. It actually absorbs oxygen through its skin. And then there's you know, spiders. They don't really have a circulatory system. It's just kind of, you know, a big mush in there. You know, I'm not a biologist or a zoologist or anything like that, but I mean, you know, there are spiders out there that don't, you know, that don't have you know, a circulatory system. So it doesn't really seem to me like those things are necessary for organisms, like in general. But to say that, oh, if you take out one particular system from this one organism, it's going to break. So therefore, everything had to have, you know, been created at once or whatnot. I think kind of maybe it ignores the mountains of evidence that we have to show that these systems develop gradually over time. And I know that your position's creationism, or creation, or maybe intelligent design. I know sometimes those can be viewed differently. But I don't see, what I don't see is evidence that everything was created all at once. What I don't see is an actual intelligent designer behind it. Because if we just take the human body, for instance, you know, why I feel like if somebody were to have system engineered the body, they would have not signed off on the human body, because you have so many different things that could go wrong and do go wrong on a regular basis. I mean, even if you go to your DNA example, with God creating DNA or DNA being intelligently designed, I really don't think that any human engineer would look at how DNA operates and be like, this is good. I don't see, especially the perfect intelligent designer, like signing off on how that operates, just because of how we know DNA interacts with the different chemicals and how it interacts in general. I don't see why they would sign off on a system that has regular errors that happen in it. Typically, whenever you're engineering a system, you want to try to drive those risk factors down of like errors or problems. Shifting back to your rocket example, I don't think that most engineers presume that the rockets work just because engineers built it. I think that they did that a couple of times, and there were a couple of ships that blew up. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that there is a presumption that they work just because they've been.
Okay, Godless Engineer just said that things didn't work perfectly and they blew up the ships. Yeah, dude, that's the whole point, is that if you don't have all the interdependent parts working, really bad stuff will happen, and you need to account for as many redundancies as possible and potential variables as possible, even though you can't account for absolutely everything, and still maintain a system. In that context of a ship, a rocket taking off, you need to be able to overcome gravity. So you have a minimal number of a maximum weight that you can have that you have to overcome in order to break the Earth's gravity. Therefore, the number of variables you can account for are limited, or you have to come up with more efficient ways to do it. And it's like, oh man, it's like he doesn't actually think about what he's saying in relation to engineering or just efficiencies or like just basic common sense.
So rigorously designed. I think that the presumption is that these are human designed systems, and so that means that they're prone to error. If
All right, well, that didn't work. I thought I could leave the stream and refresh, try and fix the microphone issue. Hopefully that fixed it. Let me know if it's still crackling. I don't know why it would be, but let's get back to playing this.
So let's see how we can kind of start diving into this. So you are correct that we do have natural explanations for a lot of things in nature. Kind of redundant, but yes, we do see the water cycle. We understand how that works. We do see, how photosynthesis works. So we understand that there are natural explanations to things. And you're correct that there was a time when people did not understand those, and so they were inserting some sort of God on top of it. Now, I would say that most of those gods they were using were false gods, that they weren't necessarily putting in, what I believe to be the one true God. But that's a different discussion. That is getting into religion instead of truly looking at a scientific explanation to the world that we see. And I do think going to the concept of intelligent design, that is, to me, following the evidence and not inserting a religious position on this. So my question, though, is yes, and we'll deal specifically with the water cycle because that's kind of what you pulled in. We see how that cycles through. But the question is, where did that cycle come from to begin with? Why is there water? How did water actually come to be? Not that it can cycle and change form, but what actually brought those molecules together and actually put the molecules here in order for water to exist? So to me, it kind of gets into that idea of, I don't know if you're familiar with the 5 arguments for the existence of God by St. Thomas Aquinas, but Aquinas put in this concept of the argument from motion, that everything in this universe is in motion. And so something had to actually put it into motion. And it couldn't have been something here in this universe because everything is already moving. So from the movement of the planets to the movements of your cells to the movements of atoms to subatomic particles, everything is already in motion. And so he was really observing, everything here in this system is moving. Something outside the system had to kind of put it into motion. And so I see that kind of application to the water cycle discussion because, yes, those things are changing form. But the question is, where did that entity come from to begin with?
Okay, so the first thing that I've got written down is about where water came from. So basically, how molecules form is that you get the elements, in the environment, and then because of the electron positions in hydrogen, and then the electron positions in oxygen, those create these bonds
right
in there, and then how the water got here on Earth. I think one of the reigning theories right now about how water formed on the Earth was it was possibly deposited via the mini meteorites that were smashed.
I don't know if you guys saw the kind of smile on her face as he was trying to explain this. as he's like, oh man, the molecules came together and like the different elements kind of, and there, oh, and then there were some meteors that hit. It's like, dude, that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about how did the atomic action come into be that enables the elements to exist, let alone them coming together to form molecules. Like, that's the point. That you are. It's just like it flies over their heads. He never thinks about this stuff. It's truly fascinating.
Smashing into the early Earth, while just after the period where it was really hot and lava-y, I guess. After that point, you still had meteorites that were striking the Earth, and those probably had ice deposits on them, and it deposited the ice here on the Earth. So that's how water got here on the Earth. And now, so the formation of water molecules is all explained by the laws of chemistry and physics.
Right. And I guess, sorry to clarify, I'm not saying I understand the chemistry behind water. The point is not, technically, how do the electrons bond and form that you have 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. The point is, where did the hydrogen and the oxygen come from? If the meteorite is bringing ice, that means ice was created or formed or begun somewhere else. So all you've done is you kind of move the starting point back a little bit to say it was then on a meteor. We could really dive into, why is chemistry stable? And I know, yes, we can generate molecules that are unstable, but the stability of how those molecules exist with the electrons, with the protons, with the neutrons, that there's different numbers of electrons in the different outer valence shells of them that can combine and form different types of bonds to generate all of the material that we see. And the stability of that, I think, is something that we need to really look into as well. If this were a randomly popped out universe, there's nothing that says the chemistry that's going to produce water, which we could not exist without. Why is that possible? Why is that stable? Why do we have the elements that we have in order for life to exist here?
Well, so as far as like how did the oxygen and hydrogen get here, as far as we can tell, in the early universe, after it inflated, and actually it would have been about 300,000 years after the inflation of the universe, when atoms started to form and everything like that.
That violates the laws of physics, that the atoms are the matter cannot be creating itself. Matter cannot be created or destroyed in nature.
Well, I didn't say that matter was created or destroyed. I just said the universe inflated, and that when 300 years after it inflated, and atoms began to form out of the stuff, if you will, that filled the universe. It was actually hydrogen, helium, and lithium that were the first elements that popped up. And then as stars began to form, which again is 300,000 years at least after the universe inflated, then stars would have started to create heavier elements. And so these stars just, they smash atoms together. If they fuse things, that's how you get light from like our sun. It's nuclear fusion that's happening. And that fills, the universe. Every time a star explodes, it fills the universe with all these heavier elements. And so as these elements interact with the environments that they find themselves in, they eventually, form all the different elements that we do find.
It's so funny. You can tell she's sitting there like just listening to him spew the talking point. And I could be wrong, but I think she's probably sitting there thinking like, does he not grasp the point that's being made? I don't care about this is how everything formed after the Big Bang. Like, that's not the point she's making. That's also not the point that Aquinas was making. We're talking about what has to be external to all of that and all of those processes in order for the process that you're now describing to take place. It's like the Evo atheists don't want to look all the way to the ultimate root of things and want to like start at step 15. We see this in abiogenesis versus evolution, like all these things. They went, oh, well, I don't have to account for that. Somebody else will handle that portion of it. We're just going to ignore all that and extrapolate out and be like, when you make the pushback and say, well, couldn't your theory be nothing but the fruit of a poison tree? Oh, no, that's not what it is. Ours is proven. Well, in any other context, your argument would be invalidated if the root of the tree upon which it is founded is ruled to be invalid. Everything gets tossed. This is a very basic concept, and yet it seems to be beyond the comprehension of the average atheist.
Now, as far as the inflation of the universe, that actually has to go to quantum mechanics, which I don't know if you really want to get into that, but there's like this absolute nothing that a lot of people think about when we're talking about the beginning of the universe doesn't actually exist, because the nothing that exists that we can at least observe still has at least a small amount of energy within it. So because it does have this small amount of energy within it, that means that we can definitely get a universe out of nothing, and it's due to how quantum scalar fields work. Whenever they're in a false vacuum state and they bump over into a true vacuum state, we've observed them to release an immense amount of energy.
Right. And that's the thing. When you're starting with that dense amount of energy, that's still something. And
Right.
so what that is getting into is trying to argue that the universe is eternal then.
No, no, not that the universe is eternal, but maybe that just reality in general is. See, I actually don't think that as far as creationism goes, with the creationist view, I don't think that you can separate God from reality, because reality meets all the criteria that somebody would attribute to a God as far as like creationism goes, unless you're arguing for a specific version of God.
Well, I would think most. I mean, I guess I can't infer everyone's definition of God, but if we define God just in this idea of something outside of this universe, so if we define the universe as time, space, energy, and matter, then really what we're talking about, at least for my purposes, is that this intelligent designer, whatever you want to call it, because I'm not trying to define which God it is for this purposes of this discussion. So whatever you want to call it is existing outside of time, space, energy, and matter. And so there's this entity, this intelligent designer that is eternal, and we can talk about that, why that has to be so if you want. But then there has to be some instantiation where the energy and the time and the space and the matter begin. And so if you're saying it all comes back to this dense packet of energy, it still is begging the question of where did that dense packet of energy come from? And so I hear what you're saying, that, of whatever heavy elements and things were exploding off of stars and all of that, but we still have to somehow explain where did those heavy elements come from, because that's still something. So saying there's a lithium atom somewhere is still something that has to come from somewhere, right? It has to begin to exist, unless you're saying that the universe is eternal.
No, I haven't said that the universe is eternal. I've only said that reality is eternal, and I'm differentiating between reality and this universe, because this universe obviously inflated, at least this instantiation of this universe, but we also can't rule out like multiple universes existing.
It's like the point just is beyond his comprehension. I'm not saying the universe is eternal, but reality is. Okay, are you a materialist / physicalist? Yes, you are. Okay, then, even if there is a multiverse, it still has the physicality that must be accounted for, the material which must be addressed, and all, which is what she was just talking about. So, are you saying that reality does not contain the atoms upon which this whole point is being levied? Are you not getting this? No. I'm not talking about the universe. I'm talking about reality. Me too. I don't care if there is a additional multiverse or a additional iteration of this universe, and big crunches and so on and so forth. Like, that still doesn't remove the whole point about what was the initial originator of the action. Unless you want to go and say that perpetual motion is a totally valid position, which I don't think anybody else is, then your point is, I believe in reality. Oh, let's keep going.
That's why I said like the fabric of reality is what we're talking about. And to go back to the quantum mechanics thing, I generally lean with the scientific consensus, or not consensus, but the scientific theory about a quantum scalar field called the inflaton field, and that's just what they named it. And basically, it was in a false vacuum state at one point, and then it fluctuated from a false vacuum state into a true vacuum state for whatever reason. It didn't even necessarily have to have a cause that forced it to do that. It just did that because that's how quantum mechanics works. But when it fluctuates from this false vacuum state into a true vacuum state, it releases a huge amount of energy, and that huge amount of energy inflated the universe near instantaneously, and which it still continues to inflate today. But at the inflation point, it inflated it near instantaneously and filled the universe with the energy needed, and this energy then transformed from one state to another state that would eventually become the matter that we have today. But of course, that didn't happen until 300,000 years after the inflation point, because of the fact that it was so hot and dense in the universe that not even atoms could form. And so once atoms did start forming, the simplest atoms that formed were hydrogen, helium, and lithium. Those were the simplest ones that formed at first.
He just repeated the same talking point while simultaneously not addressing her response to it. Dude, can you do anything other than spew the pre-printed talking points that you come up with? Because she's addressing, like, 3 or 4 times now, she has addressed your point, and you haven't responded in anything other than the same talking point.
So, I mean, I never said that this universe was eternal. I just mean that reality, which is separate from this universe, extends outside of our universe. So that's all that I was saying with that.
Okay. So that means, though, even if you have the multiverse theory or the inflation theory, you're still inserting something to spawn off atoms, to spawn off energy. Those are still substances that still require some explanation as to where they came from.
But I feel like I'm sorry. I know I'm
that's
interrupting.
okay.
I feel like I kind of explained that though with the quantum mechanics explanation.
Right. Okay. So, well, that's true. I mean, you're giving a theory about it, but everywhere, if you go back and think about all of the words you use with your theory, you're still saying it expanded, the universe expanded. Well, what is the universe? That's still going to be something, either material or energy, either matter or energy. So there has to still be somewhere something is doing these things, and you even said then it would create these different atoms because those are the simplest, right? Because they only have one electron in its outer shell. So those are still things. That's still material. So I think somewhere we need to go back and figure out well what actually began those things. But instead of belaboring all of that, because I feel like we're kind of at that impasse of discussing that type of thing, I did want to go back and talk about because you had mentioned the systems engineering about the vehicle and how that doesn't exactly apply to the body.
That was a super nice way of her saying, you don't grasp the point, so let's move on before we waste time on your stupidity.
And you're right, there are simpler existences that don't require all the same circulatory, respiratory, nervous systems that we have. I think the main point, though, is that we do require all those systems. And the natural explanation would have to be that we are slowly, incrementally building up from something simple. Right? I mean, that would be the natural explanation, that we would start with something simple and we add a component or a device or a feature or whatever. And then that becomes the main genetic makeup for the population. And then they acquire, again, something on top of that to make it a little bit more complex and a little bit more complex. I think really the takeaway point is that, yes, there are different levels of complexity of things in this world, but those that are complex, we need all of those things at one time. You can't look at the human body and say that it would have been a simpler incremental way to build up to what we do have to have, because there's not this merging gradual transition between types. And so you mentioned the fossil records. Are you familiar with the Cambrian explosion?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So when we look at the Cambrian explosion, so it's called an explosion because it's a very, very small amount of time when you're talking about millions of years ago. It was only over, it's been a while since I've looked it up, I think maybe 10 million years, which is very small when you're talking about the billions of years, for how long the evolutionary picture was going to take. But in that, there's an explosion basically of 26 different phyla of body plans that are unique and distinct and very complex, even for a simple organism. They still require multiple systems working together. And they're very distinct, 26 different phyla. Appear all at the same time without any evolutionary type of history, because that is the oldest level that we really look at. So the pre-Cambrian era has sponge cells in it. And then all of a sudden you come up to the Cambrian and you have this really fast explosion of very different body types all appearing at the same time. And that's kind of the same thing when you talked about the eye, that all of these different organisms have different eye types, but yet they're all appearing at the same time. And it's interesting you talk about the eye, because I just recently wrote an article about that yes, there's different types of eyes around, but there's not this slow incremental buildup from one eye type to the next, because they all are requiring different types of components. So I kind of walked through the example, and now I don't want to read it. I'll kind of pull up something that I talked about recently. If we look at the difference between the pigment cup eye, which is found in a planaria, just like a teeny tiny, it just looks like a little worm, but it just has a light sensitive spot. And then if you look at the pinhole eye of a nautilus, which is still considered a very simple eye, they have totally different structures to them, to where it's not you just take the pigment cup eye, the light sensitive spot, and add a few things and you end up with a pinhole eye. They still have very different purposes, different functions, different components. And though in the planaria, you have this cup of dark pigment that only has a few photoreceptors, and there's not really a full optical system. There's only just a little opening that allows a little bit of light into the cup, and the eye is extremely small.
Godless Engineer's body language is just giving away the fact that he's like, oh crap, I am way out of my league. She's sitting here diving into like different eye type comparisons. I don't have a talking point for this. What is my talking point? Where is my talking point? Oh no. Let's continue.
Small. It's only like 0.004 inches. And so it has to restrict how much light is coming in, so that it only reaches one photoreceptor, because there's not very many. And so this is not going to be an eye that's useful for hunting prey or for getting away from predators or anything other than just what a planaria does, which kind of just floats around in a petri dish, basically. But then if you look at the pinhole eye that's found on a nautilus, its eye is, orders of magnitude bigger, even though it's so small. It's 0.4 inches, but that's orders of magnitude bigger than the planaria eye. And it has millions of photoreceptors. It now has muscles that's going to move it around. It has pupils that can vary in diameter based on how much light intensity is coming through. It still doesn't have a lens, but it has a wider angle of view for each one of those photoreceptors. And so there's a very big difference just between these two very simple eye types. And if you were to start adding all those components to the planaria eye in order to make it a nautilus eye, you basically have a very poorly adapted planaria. I mean, because it can't do anything with the pinhole eye. So otherwise you have to start changing all other types of things about the body of the planaria in order to get to the nautilus. And now we have lots of systems that have to change at one time in order to get to the nautilus, because changing them incrementally one at a time, you don't get a functional planaria. And I think that's kind of applying that same kind of logic to what I was talking about with the human body organ systems, is that you can't have the slow buildup from something simple, because you need all of those things at one time to work, which was, the analogy of the rocket the launch vehicle, because you can't just slowly add, this bottle for the main propulsion system and not also add the avionics and not also add the structure. You're going to have to build it all up together because it requires all those things working together. So.
You can tell from her body language and the way she kind of ended that, like, I don't know how to dumb this down anymore. Like, this is about as simple as I can take this. How do I explain this to this guy? I mean, is he really that dumb? I mean, it's really amazing. Now, let's all guess real quick what you think his talking point response is. 3, 2, 1. Let's continue with the next Evo atheist talking point.
Sorry,
that was a lot. I'm sorry.
I've got it. No, that's fine. I've got a bad habit of interrupting people, so I'm trying hard not to interrupt or anything.
Okay.
Just curious, is the planaria an ancestor of a nautilus?
Well, I honestly, I don't know where they would put that on the evolutionary chain, but their eye type is always considered ancestral because it's just a light sensitive spot, and then you have the pinhole eye. So if you're talking about the transition of eye types, right? Those are two organisms that have that eye type.
Well, sorry, I understand. I guess I was just kind of harkening back to how you could change the planaria eye to be like the nautilus eye, but it wouldn't it wouldn't have any benefit. It would be it would be different. You'd have to change things about the planaria in order for it to be beneficial to it. And so I gotta wonder, because here's how my understanding of evolution, and I'm wondering if it matches your understanding of evolution.
Okay.
Because as far as I understand with evolution, gradual changes occur in a population of organisms over time. The adaptations or the changes that allow the organisms to propagate and survive end up winning out and becoming part of that population of organisms. And so over long periods of time, you end up seeing transitions from simple organisms like the planaria to something a bit more complex. And so I guess if you were to evolve a planaria as far as you would as far as you would for a nautilus,
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the environment and everything like that, you still wouldn't get a nautilus. You would get something totally different.
Right.
So my point is that just because there are different eye types, the way an organism evolves means that the environment that it's in shapes the form that it takes. And the attributes and changes that eventually come about in this population are a result of its ability to promote survival of that species. So while the eye has independently evolved in different groups of animals, it still it's all about the survival of the species.
Well,
It's like, dude, she's making the point of what is necessary in order for the transitions to occur has interdependencies. And therefore, how do you get from A to B if you need, at a minimum, A, and if you, in the middle of the transition to B, you would have breakdown. That's the whole point. And you're having to account for not just one little minor change. You have to account for a plethora of complicated changes in order to go from A to B. And it's like, I don't understand how anybody who calls himself an engineer cannot grasp the simplicity of the points that are being made.
I think that's the question, though. How did the eye independently evolve without also changing the organism? I think that's kind of my point, that the planaria, it can't independently evolve this eye without changing everything else about it. It's not going to function anymore if its eye is suddenly 100 times bigger than the planaria is itself.
well, but I guess I feel like you're not considering the fact that as the organism evolves, it's not like the eye is isolated, right? That the eye isn't going to be the only thing that changes. If this planaria organism.
Right. I think we're agreeing.
Right.
It can't be the only organism or the only organ that changes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so well, I mean, so my point is that if you evolve a planaria organism, it's never going to turn out to be a nautilus. It may or may not turn out to have a pinhole eye. But my point is that it would be governed by the environment that it's in as to what attributes allow it to survive. So if it is in this environment for however many
talking point repeat
millions of years, and it changes over that amount of time, the only changes that are really going to stick around and allow that population to survive are going to be ones that promote survival. So it's not just going to be like a planaria with a single eye on its head or something like that. The rest of the organism would change as well.
Right. Okay. So I think we're really agreeing on this. Okay.
Okay.
The planaria cannot just change its eye. It has to change its whole the rest of its body. And so no, we're not. It's not necessarily going to turn into the nautilus. Okay, that was just kind of the example. If evolution is saying the light sensitive spot, that pigment cup eye, becomes a pinhole eye, those are just two example organisms with those two different types of eyes that you can see the different function, the different purpose, the different environment that those eyes exist in. The problem though is if you're going to change the pinhole or the pigment cup eye into the pinhole eye, you have to change a lot more than just the eye. You have to change the rest of the body too to accommodate this new eye type, the muscles for it, the pupil for it, the millions of new photoreceptors that have to go into it to become a pinhole eye. And I think now that's going to be a problem with evolution because you need multiple changes to happen at the same time. Whereas evolution says each change has to be incremental and slow and gradual and really micro mutations, or it is going to kill the organism. And that's really what they've seen in laboratory experiments. That when they make, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I can see you're questioning that.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't understand what you mean by micro mutations, and then how micro mutations would cause an organism to die.
Okay. So what they've done in genetics experiments, they've used the fruit fly, Drosophila, because it replicates so quickly. It has such a short lifespan, and they have gone in and done a number of genetic mutations, all the possible genetic mutations that they can do, and they found that 70% of them kill the organism, like they're detrimental to it. The mutations are 30% of them are weakly beneficial, or they're neutral, meaning it might change the color of it, but that's not going to progress it to anything in the.
Did you see his eyes get wide when she said 70% are dead? While rocking in back and forth in the chair, knowing he's being utterly obliterated. And well, actually, you know what? I take that back. He might not know he's getting obliterated. He might actually not know that. I don't know. Who knows? People in the chat were saying that he was just winning. She didn't know what she was talking about and was not making any sense. So maybe he actually thinks something. I don't know. Who knows with this guy?
Evolutionary chain, so to speak. And they're making these mutations. They have to be micro mutations because if you have a macro mutation, it actually ends killing the organism. It just dismantles it, usually in the embryonic development type stage. If there's such a large genetic mutation, then it kills the organism. Okay, so they have to be micro mutations, and that's even. So I see you're questioning that. Did you have a question for?
Well, because I guess I'm having trouble understanding what the difference between a micro mutation and a bigger mutation is.
Okay. So between the two terms, micromutation would be in the genetics within the species, right? Macromutation is going to be that change takes it out of that kind of organism into a different kind of organism that would be what would be necessary for the evolutionary chain to exist.
Well, I don't think
change the organism type.
Well, okay, so but you understand that that's not what evolution says. Evolution doesn't say that that one organism will birth a completely different organism.
Correct. Yes, I'm agreeing with that. Right. So we're agreeing all of the changes have to be that micromutation. You can't have a large scale change because that's not what evolution says. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking like teeny tiny incremental genetic mutations that slowly alter the organism so that over time, billions of those build up to then a macro level change.
Right.
Right. Okay. So I think what the problem is when you're looking at the planaria, what you've said is that for it to develop, and we're still kind of talking its eye, right? The light sensitive spot on the planaria to become a pinhole eye, it needs more changes than just the eye. It's going to have to change the size of it, its environment, it needs a different muscle structure, all of those things to support a different eye. Now we're talking lots of different changes at one time because doing just one of them at a time is going to not be a survival advantage for that planaria. Right. So if we're talking micromutations that we can only alter one slight thing at a time, because that's what evolution says, right? Then if we take the planaria eye that only has a few photoreceptors and we dump in millions of photoreceptors on its slow progression to the pinhole eye, it doesn't have a functional eye anymore. So it's not going to.
Oh man, I don't know if you guys saw the look on his face there. It was oh snap. I need a talking point right now because I gotta interject a talking point and bring this to a halt because she might be making sense against my position. So I need talking point now. Talking point. Where was one? Somebody send me one now.
To survive as the planaria, it's going to get naturally selected out of the gene pool.
Well,
right?
I mean, for those mutations that don't benefit it, I can't remember the exact statistics. I think it's somewhat similar to what you had said before. Most mutations are either neutral or detrimental, or not either neutral or detrimental.
Right.
I will agree with that, but that means that the good mutations do survive. So, I mean, so for an organism to evolve, like a population of organisms to evolve, while most mutations are going to be neutral or detrimental, that still means that those good mutations are going to allow the organism to survive. So I'm kind of curious as to, do you have any specific citations for the idea that one micromutation is going to cause a species to be wiped out, or is that not what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. But I guess what I'm saying is if we take that planaria and we make that one micromutation, it doesn't have a fully functional different type of eye. It now has it has an eye that works worse than it did before the mutation. And so
how do you know that?
Well, I'm speaking hypothetically, because I really want to see hypothetically, how would this evolutionary through micromutations actually progress to a different organism? If you can only make one slight change at a time, and they have to be random, how is it going to continue to give an advantage to that particular organism that it's going to propagate through the rest of that population and that generation, that it's actually going to be that survival advantage? So, well,
because the mutations happen, right? And the mutations that would cause an organism to not survive, that are not beneficial, would not survive, as that organism, or maybe one or two organisms after that. The point is that eventually those traits die off, right? The neutral mutations, they stay in the organism. And then the good mutations would allow the organisms to survive. So you got this population, and you've got some of them dying off due to these bad mutations, but then you've got this contingent that is surviving better and is passing along those genes to their descendants. And with the fact that the neutral genes and the good genes working together in the environment, but because the environment's very important here as to whether or not the mutation is beneficial. Because a mutation in one environment could be beneficial, but in another environment could not be beneficial.
Right.
I guess my point is that what we're seeing is, at least like right now, as far as the world that we see now, what we're seeing is the end product of that line of mutations that has resulted in the forms of life that we have now.
Did he not comprehend a single point she was making about how the necessity of having them simultaneously in order to reach the end novel function on a macro level? Like, that's the entire point. It's like all of this. I mean, well, this obviously all goes over his head, but at this point, I think we understand where he came to this conclusion.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
So we're not talking about the bad mutations that happened where those particular organisms died off, but we're talking about the line of organisms where the neutral and good mutations have survived in the species, and we're here now at this point in time.
Right. So I think the problem is that we can't the hypothetical recreation of what changes would take place to incrementally go from one organism type to another. Okay, so we'll let's use a different example. Let's say to go from, because I know on the evolutionary tree, we go from fish to amphibians to reptiles. So we're going to go from, a frog to an alligator. And no, I don't mean a frog gives birth to an alligator. I'm not saying that. But let's just look at their particular egg type. Okay, because for evolution to work, the reproductive system still has to work. Okay, so you can't make have a genetic micromutation that destroys its ability to reproduce, because then you don't have the next generation of organisms to try to evolve, right? So if we're going to progress incrementally, gradually, transitioning between a frog egg type to a alligator egg type, we have to have some intermediate egg type that bridges the gap between that. And if we agree that the evolutionary progression has to be micromutations, one tiny step at a time, my question is, with what change could you do first of the few change? I say few, if we're going to talk like a simplified explanation here, to go from a frog egg to a reptile egg, could you do first and not destroy the frog egg? Okay.
Well, so I mean, I'm not like a biologist or a zoologist, so I don't know the exact changes in these organisms, which going from amphibian to reptile, I'm not exactly.
And there we go, ladies and gentlemen, proof beyond all doubt that Godless Engineer does nothing but spew often regurgitated talking points by Evo atheists, but is clearly not grasping the counterpoints that are being made here, and is just attempting to dismiss it, but has now resulted in the, well, I'm not a zoologist, so I don't know. It's like, dude, this is basic common sense. If you understand the point that's being made, you don't have to be an expert in this stuff in order to grasp the point, at least assuming you have enough IQ points.
I don't know if that's how the evolutionary clades work, but there would be incremental changes, between between one clade and another clade.
But it has to not destroy it has to not destroy the species in the transition. So
Right.
so that's, so if you just picture the frog egg, like it has to be in water, it's jelly-like, right? Even without knowing all the details. But then we know and what comes out of the frog egg is a tadpole, and it has to go through metamorphosis, right?
Right.
So if we look at the alligator egg, it's a hard shell. It doesn't have to be in water. And what comes out, it actually has the baby actually has to have a tooth to peck out of the egg to crack to hatch.
Mhm.
And then what comes out is a miniature adult, right? It's an alligator, but it's just on a small scale. It doesn't go through metamorphosis. So if we just think just on those terms, just very general terms, how would we, with one micromutation at a time, change from that jelly-like frog egg that has to be in water without a tooth to break it out, because otherwise it would destroy the egg, and an organism that has to go through metamorphosis, to this one slight successive modification at a time? To me, it requires a whole-scale change. But then, like you said, that's a macromutation that violates the premise of the slow micromutation process.
Well, I feel like understanding the evolutionary tree between the two is very important here, because have you heard of the law of monophyly?
That sounds familiar, but I could not tell you what that was. So go ahead and tell me.
Okay, so the law of monophyly says that an organism that's part of one clade will always, and a clade is like a group of organisms that express a certain set of traits, right? Mm-hmm. So like you've got a clade of organisms, and that organism will, that organism's descendants will always be in that clade, right? So like the frogs will always be in the clade of organisms that express the characteristics of having lungs and 4 limbs, right? Like I don't know. Again, I'm not I'm not like a zoologist or a biologist or to know what the different clade names are. But so basically, frogs will always be in that clade, and alligators will always be in that clade. Mm-hmm. But frogs are actually split. Like that's let's see, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 clades back. On with the differences between frogs and alligators. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is that a frog will never become an alligator.
Okay.
So
except that somehow the ancestor of the frog became both the frog and the alligator.
And what you have is as far as the different clades that we've been able to establish, you've got the lungs with 4 limbs clade, and then what you have is claws or nails developing. Those are in a group. And then you'll have keratinous scales, the scales that they have. And then you've got the quote unquote gizzard. And then on one branch, you've got feathers that develop. And then on another branch, you have alligators. So alligators are actually more closely related to birds than they are frogs.
Well, but that's the thing. You have to transition between each of those, right? Even if they're 4 clades apart, there has to be some sort of transition that goes between that. So how is it getting from a gelatinous egg to the hard-shelled egg? How is it bridging the gap in the reproductive system? What organism has a hybrid of that?
Well, again, I'm not going to be able to explain that to you. But what I can tell you is that through the 4 different clades and the millions of generations that had these mutations working on them, you eventually end up with all of the good and neutral mutations resulting in alligators and birds.
Okay.
The amount of faith that's required to make that statement, coupled with stunning ignorance of what is being argued, is truly astounding. I mean, like, have you not grasped a single point that was being made about the underlying requirements from the mutation perspective of what would have to have occurred in order to go from frog egg to alligator egg or crocodile, whatever she was using, in terms of the hard shell versus soft shell, and all the different underlying pieces that have to go into play in between those? And he's like, it was millions of years. I can't explain it. We don't know why. Even though from the Cambrian explosion perspective, we have to have full body plan transitions be accounted for, and all of the data or the information modifications that are necessary for that to those transitions to take place. But I'm just going to say there were positive mutations that happened over millions of years, even though I have to account for it to happen much shorter periods of time than that. But let's just ignore all that part and go back to our talking points and extreme levels of necessary faith.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can't even hypothetically determine what change would come first to have micromutation level changes between these organism types and not destroy the organism. And I know what you're saying, that, of course, only the ones that help the organism survive, right? Their beneficial mutations are going to be carried forward. And I guess my point is that, yes, there are micromutations within a species, within a kind of organism, but the amount of change that's necessary to jump out of that kind of organism to a different kind of organism requires more whole-scale changes than what evolution would allow. That it's not a natural, slow, incremental process, because it requires multiple changes at one time, which to me goes to creation, right? Well, especially when we couple that with that Cambrian explosion, when we have 26 different body types showing up in the fossil record all at the same time, and they're distinct from one another, they're slowly, gradually transitioning into one another.
Well, so I mean, as far as the Cambrian explosion goes, that's a 20 million year period, and so you're talking about 20 million years of changes and everything that happened.
But if it is okay, so if you're saying that that's 20 million years that things can evolve between each other, that's ridiculously fast for evolution to work. When you're talking about 70% of mutations are detrimental, and how many tiny micromutations you would need to transition between each of these types, just probability and statistic wise, that's improbable for you to have that many favorable mutations in that span of time if we're having trouble finding them in the billions of years span of time.
No, I don't. Well, no, it doesn't really make sense to me, because I don't see that being a problem for evolution, given that mutations happen, and these mutations don't like you don't have to have like a huge or a huge number of mutations to happen all at once in order for an organism to change.
Well, you would, if you're going to explain all of those arriving within the Cambrian explosion as being evolution, then you would have to have a bunch of them happening super quickly for that to happen in 20 million years.
She does not grasp any of this. It is so painful. This is just mind-bendingly, hilariously bad. I mean, good. It's like, dude, she has addressed this over and over again, and you keep pulling out the same talking point over and over again. It's so bad.
Years.
Well, super quickly being millions of years. I mean, we're talking about geologic timescales here, so I mean, it takes a long time for these things to happen.
Right.
So I mean,
so if all of those things are showing up in a span that's only 20 million years, that's too much change to happen in that short amount of time. And I know short is relative, but short based on compared to the whole geologic column, that's a short amount of time. That's why they call it an explosion.
This relates to the Cambrian explosion, but do you know that crustaceans have evolved independently like 5 times on Earth? Like there are 5. I think it's 5. There's multiple different lines of crustaceans that have evolved independently of one another. Okay. And so my point in bringing this up with the Cambrian explosion is that you don't have to have like in the Cambrian explosion, you got one population of organisms, and then, you have to explain all the different body types, with all that. You've got several different populations that are convergently evolving, these same traits. Another good example of convergent evolution is with pandas, red pandas, and another the black and white pandas. I think they're just pandas. Anyways, those two they independently developed their fake thumb, and in order to be able to eat the bamboos that's in their environment that they live off of. And so they independently evolved those things because it allowed them to survive. It was beneficial to them in the environment that they were in. So I don't think that you necessarily need one single like sequential line of evolution to explain all the body types. I think that you could have multiple simultaneously evolving populations of organisms that produced all the different body types. So there's that. Sorry,
go ahead.
Well, I didn't know how much longer you wanted to go, because we have been going for about an hour 45, and I don't want to we've been going a little bit over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes. So I don't know how long. We didn't talk about that before.
I know. I meant to ask you too before we got on how long, because we could go forever, I think.
Yeah, we could.
Godless Engineer is waving the white flag. I'm being annihilated. Are you okay with stopping? Because this is getting painful for me.
I think, would you be okay going for the next 15 minutes to round out the hour and a half?
Sure, I'm fine with that.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, well, I guess to your point, the crustaceans, 5 different, those are still crustaceans though. When we're talking about the different body plans, we're talking about different phyla at the phyla level. Okay, so it sounds like with the 5 different types of crustaceans, that would all be within one phyla. But that's what shows up on in the Cambrian explosion, that there's these vastly different types of body plans. And so yes, even if you had some evolution between the two, 20 million years, that's lightning fast. When you talk about the typical definition or explanation of evolution changing and explaining all the variety. And no, I don't mean that every single type of species appeared in the Cambrian explosion, but those distinct body plans show up at the same time. So I don't know.
I was just going to ask, because it's been brought up a couple of times. Could you define what you mean by kinds?
Kingdom, phylum, order, class, family, genus, species, right? Or classification of organisms. So I'm talking more like at the family level. So right above genus. So because there is variation within species, but what evolution needs is to break out.
Look at him, he's trying to go with what's your definition of kind? That hasn't been firmly defined. So your logic doesn't make any sense if you don't give me a specific definition of kind, when I wasn't really using that as a fundamental component to any of my arguments at all. We've been talking about the necessity of the different components that have to be working in unison in order to achieve the system that are necessary for the variation between organisms, and it not being plausible to just happen slowly when there's massive differentiation points, like that have to be accounted for in a very short period of time.
Of that actual body plan type of organism into something totally different. So, for example, like if we're going to go from an ant to a wasp, they actually have a drastically different body plan of how many different segments they have. One has 3 segments, one has 2 segments. And so those have to have, there's actually an issue of when a genetic mutation could take place in order to change the body plan of the ant and the wasp. Okay. Or even if you put the spider in there that has 1 segment. So they're
Look at him. He's Googling. He's trying to Google some stuff right now. Either that or is reading through side chat. And I'm sure somebody is giving him potential responses or objections to this.
They're similar organisms, but they have different body plans. And so if there's a mutation that's going to change the body plan to go from a 2 segment to a 3 segment, if that happens really early in the embryonic development, it kills the organism. It can no longer actually grow in the embryonic stage because that mutation has damaged everything else about it. But if a mutation happens later in the embryonic process, that body plan to be 2 segment or 3 segment has already been set. And so there's not a valid mutation that can take place that would actually change it from a 2 segment organism to a 3 segment organism. Because if it happens early in the process, it kills it. If it happens late in the process, that body plan's already set through the embryonic development. And so those are the types of mutations that evolution has to have to then change it to that different clade that you're talking about, that has a drastically different feature about it to then actually progress to a new organism type.
Well, so yeah, but I mean, I still have to harken back to the whole law of monophily thing, because like ants, the insects that we know of ants now will never be wasps.
Right.
They could, I guess, potentially become wasp-like in the future,
right.
but they're never going to be wasps.
Right.
So I guess I don't understand.
But you need something to go between. If you're going to explain the wasp's existence and you're going to say it got there through evolution, something has to go from some non-wasp through lots of changes to become a wasp, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. If even if you're just talking about changing the from a 2 segmented body to a 3 segmented body, you have to change that body segment type to get from one to the other. I'm not saying it can't produce a wasp, but you have to have some slight modification, some tiny change to go between them. And I'm saying even those tiny changes aren't going to be able to adequately break it out of its kind to start the path to a new kind.
Well, so what we know about like the evolution of both ants and wasps, just to stay in this particular example,
okay,
there was a totally different organism that was totally different from both wasps and ants, that it divided, and one particular path evolved into ants and one particular path evolved into wasps. So like I'm not going to sit here and speculate what that organism was, what its biomechanical processes were, or anything like that. But I get the feeling that you're possibly speculating about that organism, and then speculating further to say, well, if this one particular type of mutation, which I don't even know, like if that level of mutation is what would happen. Like the mutations are so granular, and there's multiple mutations that happen at one time. I sincerely doubt the whole one mutation happens and the embryo of this organism dies immediately, like and will never be born, which I feel is like the argument that you're making.
Well, for that particular type of mutation to change the body plan. I mean, there could be other mutations that would change its color, but that's the thing for evolution to start progressing, though. It has to have mutations that give a totally different. It can't just be a variety within the species. It has to break it out of the actual body plan for that organism. So, okay, so if you're saying the common ancestor, that there was some ancestral parentage that then gave rise to both the ant and the wasp, then that ancestral parent has to have had some sort of body plan that could possibly have a 3 segment and a 2 segment. But we have to think about on the genetic level of how would that actually work. I think that's the struggle, is when we actually kind of put the pencil to the paper of what would actually change and not kill the organism, that is a big enough change that it actually starts breaking it out of just a variety of wasp to become an ant. It starts to become kind of a statistical nightmare of what is actually going to happen to drive that level of change, if we're talking just micromutations.
Well, so I'm not a geneticist,
right.
and so while I'm not a geneticist, I do understand how mutations do change things in animals, and I don't like this.
Yeah, guys, he knows exactly how mutations change things in animals, because yeah, folks, he really
but It is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Whole concept of big changes. I feel like you're talking about mutations on a quote unquote micro level, but then you're trying to represent them as like these bigger changes. And like I don't think that I nor you can speculate about the common ancestor as to whether or not this particular mutation could occur and it would produce viable offspring. I mean, obviously there was a set of mutations that occurred that allowed for that split in the common ancestor.
Well, now why do you say obvious? Well, why do you say obviously? Why do you say
because
obviously?
there's a clear evolutionary line between that connect both wasps and ants to a common ancestor a few generations back.
But based on what?
Based on well, that's what I was trying to get at with the whole what's your definition of kind, because it seems like morphology is what you're looking at there. But I mean, that's how we do classify animals, is by what morphology do they have. If we if there's a slow gradual change from one morphology to another morphology, then that results in a change of kind, if you will, if you're looking at it from that point of view.
Right.
But
I just think that the obviously it happened. I don't think that's obvious, because I don't think that there's a clear way, even hypothetically, because it's not in the fossil record. We don't have any fossil record of this type of transition. So the fossil record shows distinct body plans showing up in a very short relative amount of time.
Well,
but even the hypothetical transition between these species, that's what I'm trying to drive at, is that let's just think in the hypothetical realm, how would things have changed because you said slow gradual, slight modification process that would result in a big change. And so that's what I'm saying, the big change, because eventually you have to change from organism A to organism B, and you have all these intermediate parts in between. And what I'm saying is can we just play the guessing game of what would have been the first intermediate between A and B, and what micro change would have to happen to get between organism A to organism B. And as we've looked at these several examples of the eye and the planaria, and we talked about the frog to the reptile egg type, and the ant to the wasp, to me it starts to fall apart, because we can't look at what first slight change could you do to that organism A, whatever example we use, right, to slowly transition it to organism B, because it has to still be not only surviving, but thriving, because it has to then, be the predominant genetic code that's going to repopulate, but it has to reproduce. So you have to have enough of those genetic mutations in the same generation, the same population, to reproduce for that to carry forward. Because you couldn't have just, 2% of that population have a mutation. It then has to propagate across the whole population for it to then, really continue forward and change what that population looks like. So then it just becomes this probability issue of there's still not enough time for that to happen.
I don't think that there's a probability issue, because if you consider the the amount of organisms that have been in existence, which is,
I don't think it's a probability issue. It is a recognized probability issue. Why do you think there's been so many different hypotheses on how to overcome the probability issue and the waiting time problem and all these other kind of things? Like, what do you mean there's not a probability issue? Like, maybe not in your mind there's not a probability issue, but words fail me, folks. Words fail me.
I'm not going to try to speculate a number, but we're talking a lot of organisms, because we're talking about millions and millions of years, which I don't know if you're old Earth or young Earth.
Well, that doesn't matter for this discussion.
Okay. But we're talking about millions and millions.
I love that response. It's so funny when it's like, are you young Earth, old Earth? And it's like they say young Earth. Well, why they try to spin it off over into like there's not enough time for all this stuff, and it's like has zero relevance. We're talking about your supposed explanation that you're relying upon to overcome the necessity for an intelligent agent, and we're talking about it from your timeline. It's like I'm using your own evidence and your logic to put forth what has to be accounted for from your own worldview. Like, dude, this is not that complicated. However, it seems to be something that goes over the heads of a dramatic percentage of Evo atheists, at least the ones on YouTube, that somehow just refuse to grasp the obvious.
Millions of years of generations upon generations upon generations of these changes occurring. And so with the number of animals that at least we see today on the Earth, and the amount of variance that we see, I really don't see issue there. I don't see the issue with this probability problem that you're talking about, because I mean, given enough time and
dude, the sheer number of variants is something that has to be accounted for in the probability problem. You saying that there's all these different variations of different animal types, that's something you have to account for in the probability problem. Good night.
Enough organisms, you're going to eventually get the evolutionary lines that we plainly see out. And I mean, as far as like fossils of like ants and stuff, now I'm not sure about any kind of fossilized ants or anything like that, but I do know that like we do have organisms encased in amber, and a good example of this would be the link between scorpions and spiders, because they're actually cousins. And it was actually recently found encased in amber, this sort of spider scorpion hybrid. And so that's kind of like because every species is in transition, but it's a transition between it's kind of like a connecting organism between spiders and scorpions. And we don't have these spider scorpions anymore today. Mm-hmm. So it kind of seems to me like just because we don't know the exact morphology or the exact genetic code of any particular organism in the past that eventually produced whatever organisms that we have today, mm-hmm. I don't think that means that it all had to come about by some intelligent designer. I feel like the math works out on the amount of mutation that we have, the populations and how they reproduce and change. Like I just don't see like a problem in the math there, because obviously while mutations are either neutral or detrimental, there are good mutations that do happen, and those good mutations do survive in the population, and that allows that population to further survive, propagating those good mutations to the rest of the population, and thereby changing the population. And then repeating this process over millions and millions of years, you can morphologically change a species, just for instance, from whatever whatever precursor there was to ants and wasps, over millions of years, and these small changes, you would eventually come to ants and wasps in different clades, mm-hmm. But they're still both part of that, parental clade. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get that you are very much convinced that the smallest mutation would cause.
The talking point regurgitation we just heard glossed over everything and answered nothing. It's truly, truly astounding.
The embryo to be abandoned, or to not even form, or not even be born, or die immediately.
Well, not all of them. That's not what I meant. I don't think that all of them would destroy the embryo. But
okay.
That particular example of changing the body plan of the ant to the wasp does, and that's proven by some experiments that geneticists have done. No, what I'm saying is when you look at what changes have to take place to go from between different organism types, because in order for this macro evolutionary picture to exist, we have to transition between types. Like at some point, you have to break out of this type of organism into a different type. Otherwise, we just have variety within one particular type of organism. We wouldn't have the variety that we have now. And what I'm trying to say is that when you look at the changes that are necessary, you can only do a micro mutation at a time. You can't do a whole scale change of the organism, because that's not what evolutionary says, or Darwinian evolution says. So when we look at these tiny changes where 70% of them kill the organism, they're very rarely are they beneficial, but they have to be random and yet progress somehow through this progression to a different organism type, but they all have to be benefiting the organism. So I think the statistics come in that the odds are mutations are not beneficial, because when we look at mutations in humans, they are rarely, if ever, beneficial. Right? The worst thing that you can hear as a mother expecting a child is that there's some sort of genetic mutation, right? That is not a beneficial thing. So typically mutations are not adding information. They're not gaining new things to the organism. They're taking information away or distorting information for what it should be. And natural selection actually works to preserve the genetic pool like that for what actually works for the organism. So for Darwinian evolution to work, we have to have enough of these changes to progress slowly, incrementally, slight successive modification at a time to get between out of this organism type into another one. And I'm saying when you really look at the details, it starts falling apart for how those changes are actually going to take place. Instead of just saying it evolved with this big word and glossing over the details, when we look at those tiny details of how would a pigment cup eye actually change to a pinhole eye, and what actually has to take place, and how would that be beneficial of the transition between those two eye types? How would that benefit the organism? And then how would we have enough of that same genetic mutation generating the same physical expression across the gene pool for that generation of organisms to actually then become the new population, to then have the next mutation to go to the next generation? It becomes, to me, when you look at the details, very problematic. And so I think that on top of that Cambrian explosion, on top of our systems engineering design of our body, the information that's contained in that DNA, because information has to have an intelligent source. To me, all of that speaks that there was a unique creator that created the life that we see today.
Well, so, I mean, I'm wondering if I understand you correctly, mm-hmm. Do you think that all mutations are bad?
That's his response to her eloquent summation of the points that she's putting forth and the things that must be addressed. And his response, ladies and gentlemen, is, do you think all mutations are bad? That's the counter question.
A vast majority of them are, yes.
Well, a vast the vast majority
of them are. Yes.
Well, no, a majority are. There are obviously more bad mutations than good mutations, but the majority of mutations are either neutral or they're bad.
Right. So that means it's even less that's actually beneficial. That's changing the organism.
No.
Oh, this is cracking me up. I agree with you completely about her patience level. I mean, for me at this point, I would. Well, it's a case in point in my debate with him. I mean, it's like, by this stage and this many times to like get him to grasp the basics, I'm already at the "are you an idiot" position, like actually asking that direct question, like, how dumb are you? Because I feel bad, annihilating people when it's like, am I up against somebody who's like low IQ, has some special needs that need to be addressed? Like, I don't want to be an asshole to somebody who's actually needs help and is like just completely brainwashed, but now you're going to claim that I'm the one that doesn't know what I'm talking about, and you're going to question my ability to comprehend these things when I've been sitting here trying to dumb this down for you over and over and over again. You are absolutely right, Oz. Bless this woman's patience. 100% agree. No ifs, ands, buts about it. And you can tell that she's just like, am I actually repeating this again?
No, I mean, it's the same amount that's been beneficial to the organism. But the fact is that not all mutations are bad for the organism. There are obviously good mutations that happen. And also, the mutations that happen are, whether or not they're beneficial, are entirely dependent upon the environment that they live in. But in any case, I know that I've kept you here for well over an hour and a half, and I appreciate your time. But do you want to, I know you kind of gave your final, I guess it kind of seemed like you were kind of giving your final thoughts. Was there anything else?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of, I thought kind of wrapping it up that really even outside of the discussion about evolution, which I love having that discussion. So I appreciate you bantering back and forth with that, because I really enjoy getting into those details. But it really comes down to, if we're talking about evolving DNA, DNA has information, and information has to come from an intelligent source. So I think, however that information evolved or mutated or didn't or whatever, it all comes back to that there has to be some intelligence that puts information in a code. And so that, to me, is, one of the biggest, the presumption of fact that inference to the best explanation is that information is going to come from intelligence.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming on here.
Oh man, look at him. Let's not go down this rabbit hole. Thanks for coming. You just completely obliterated all of my positions, and now you've put something in front of me that I've been embarrassed on over and over again. And because I don't even think that's like real information, it's just like some chemical stuff. And yeah, so thanks for coming. But yeah.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
I personally don't think that DNA can be information as it's kind of implied by what you said. I don't consider DNA to be designed at all. Like I said before, DNA shouldn't have passed any kind of engineering review or anything like that because of the process that it uses in order to copy the genes and produce the proteins and everything like that. I really don't see the intelligence behind it. I think that if God did design it, then he's a rather poor designer. But in any case, I don't see any problems with evolution. I
look at the multiple talking points he's got in there, like with if there's a designer, he's not a good one. It's like, okay, let's say he's a bad designer, but it's everything that we're seeing still would require a design. How does that, whether or not he's bad or good, doesn't remove the necessity for the intelligent agent acting as the design catalyst for whatever is being analyzed to exist. Like, you can't just dismiss it because you're like, I would have done things differently, therefore nobody designed this. It's so bad, folks. Good grief. The talking points of Evo Atheists on YouTube are just, it's astounding every time I listen to this stuff.
should have asked you this beforehand, and you don't have to answer now, but other than things look designed, therefore they are designed by a god or an intelligent designer. I really didn't hear any kind of real support for intelligent design, other than just these are things that I don't understand about biology or how these things would have evolved or anything like that.
What there's no the entire everything that she's been talking about is why you would need an intelligent agent. Did you not grasp a single sentence that came out of this woman's mouth for the previous 1 hour and 35 minutes of discussion? Like, she put forth nothing. No, like, did you listen to her presentation at the very beginning? The entire point of which is, hey, look at these systems in these biological systems, and why they would. It is the logical conclusion that they would need the designer in order to exist. For crying out loud, man. Yeah.
I didn't really hear I didn't hear anything to support the intelligent design hypothesis. As far as I can tell, things have naturally evolved over time through these small mutations that do happen. Given enough time and enough organisms, with enough mutations happening, they can definitely change morphologically, and they have changed morphologically. I don't know. I don't know what the citation would be for saying that this mutation would definitely kill off this organism. I do know that mutations can add new functionality to an organism depending on the environment that it lives in. And I feel like we're not exactly defining information here, because like I said before, DNA, I don't feel is information depending on how you define it. We can interpret it as like information. We can interpret it as a code so that we can understand it better. But ultimately, DNA is just a chemical, and it reacts with other chemicals in line with the laws of chemistry and physics and everything like that. And there was things that we went over tonight that we didn't even get.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, are you serious?
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
One of the facets of Christianity is obsolete, specifically the fundamentalist view of Genesis. So, let's see, let me go through we started talking about genetic code, and what I have to say about genetic code is that we can interpret it as genetic code, like as code, as information, but inherently DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It's a chemical. This chemical reacts with certain other chemicals in various systems in order to produce different proteins. This is akin to like Diet Coke and regular Coke. I wouldn't say that Diet Coke inherently contains any kind of useful information just because it has a chemical code behind it. The change between Diet Coke and regular Coke doesn't prove anything about the existence of God. So I would just caution the use of genetic code as information and as a way to suggest that we need a creator in order for it to exist.
Get to, which I'm glad, because there was the prime mover argument that you brought up. I had that in mind to bring up too, but we got really sidetracked on the whole evolution discussion. But I don't want to take up any more of your time, and maybe if you're up for it, maybe sometime in the future I can have you back on and we can maybe discuss some of these other things. But I want you to have your Friday night, because I know I'm going to go and spend my Friday night with my wife. And so if you will, just let everybody know where they can find you at and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll get out of here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed the discussion. And you can find me at defendthefaithministry.com. And maybe we can get back together again and continue the conversation.
That sounds great. And I'll be in contact to set that up sometime in the future. And anyways, I hope all of you heathens have a great Friday night. As you guys know, we're not going to be having a regular stream tonight. So I know some of you are really going to miss that, but we'll be back to our regular schedule next week.
Okay, folks, there is no way he's having her come back. There is no way. And the fact that they said, oh, we're not going to do a stream tonight, that's because his wife is going to be giving him, cuddle session to recover from the utter obliteration that he just absorbed. Oh, man, it's so good. Oh, it's so good. The content these people provide for us is is absolutely, it's so funny. I just appreciate it so much. I get so much entertainment and humor out of this. It's truly epic. Okay. We might do a little after show here and let people come in and discuss, see what you think. Before I do that, can people in the chat please let me know if my microphone is still crackling? Because we're still crackling, I'm going to cut it off here because I don't want it to be like long conversations versus like little short clips. And I'll have to like maybe do something different. In the meantime, to hearing your feedback on that, at 8:30 Central, 9:30 Eastern, I will be moderating over on Standing for Truth channel. He's got a debate with Crimson Nair, and I believe it's going to be on whether or not you can lose your salvation. So that should be a good conversation between the two of them. I know SFT has been putting in a lot of effort on the both recovering from his drug overdose as a result of having the flu, but getting ready for this for tonight's debate. So that should be a good one. Okay, awesome. So the crackling's gone. I guess we can do a little short after show then. We'll put the link in for anybody who wants to join. And let's see here. All right, link is now in the side chat for anybody who wants to join. We'll maybe do maybe like 20, maybe like 30, 40 minutes of discussion if people want to join. Pretty quick. Oh, Sedgel, appreciate you joining us. I know it's late for you. Hope you get some good sleep, and appreciate your support to the channel. It's very much everybody comes in and makes it fun for me to kind of go through these things and actually discuss the sheer lunacy of the talking points that we hear ad nauseum, and the inability of people like Godless Engineer to grasp the obvious and actually come up with reasonable counterpoints to their opponent on the fly based on their underlying knowledge of what is being put forth versus I'm going to regurgitate the Matt Dillahunty talking point and then act like everything in the underlying that is necessary in order for this talking point to be valid. I don't need to know any of that. And when those points start to get obliterated, I'm just going to be like play defense and be like, well, I don't know anything about that. So somebody else is going to have to account for how this is remotely plausible to be my like fundamental position of how I view the underlying requirements for my existence to have come into being. Oh, no, folks. No. Somebody came up with an answer for that, even though there's all sorts of books, papers, and documentaries, all these different things out there that are like, we haven't answered these questions. So I don't know what to tell you, folks. Let's it's nuts. Sidebar, I'm gonna put a link to the debate. These debates in the side chat here real quick. And it's gonna kick off in about an hour from now, a little hour and hour and 10 minutes from now will be the debate over on SFT. So that link is in the side chat. Awesome. Jungle says the mic sounds good. Awesome. Oh, Cheryl also got the link. Appreciate that, Cheryl. And Patrick Alexander says that guy's repetition of how DNA is similar to Coca-Cola is absurd. He would be laughed right out of academic circles. I know, it's ironic that is the case, and yet the Evo atheists on YouTube continue to double, triple, quadruple, and quintuple down on that talking point of it's just chemicals. And it's like, I know that it's just chemicals, but it's the order of the chemical molecules are what's in play. That's what is having to be accounted for. This is not that difficult to grasp if you just use your brain for 2 seconds versus impersonating Jim Carrey. And well, I'll just let Jim Carrey talk for himself.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
Man, that little clip never gets old in relation to what is being argued in these in these discussions, man. Oh, it's too good. It is too good. Real quick, so if everybody's just joined us, hope you are enjoying what's going on here. And if it's your first time in or you haven't heard what's going on in the last couple of days, just got authorized for memberships here on YouTube. So if you're interested in that, we got some fun custom emojis they got put in here. There's some different other fun stuff that can be associated with becoming a member, as well as just my great appreciation for helping get all those things going and some of the different things that I'm working on. So if you want to be a side chat brawler, that's one of the options. You can be Evolution Destroyer or an ID Gladiator. And there's an additional level, which I'm coming up with a name for. It's up there. I haven't named it yet. And then those range obviously from like $4 to $25. And then just so people know, I haven't actually, it's the first time I've explained on this. One of the things I'm actually planning on doing with some of this money is having some different like a little explainer videos produced, and really dive into some of the fundamentals that must be accounted for in a lot of these discussions and concepts, and really put them back into perspective for everyone who is contemplating these things. And in line with that, what was I going to show? Oh yeah, going back to the whole chemicals thing, right? So something that's like so fundamental that just gets completely ignored and like glossed over and is not understood by a gigantic percentage of people I've interacted with is that things like the codon, anti-codon matching and the codon amino acid. By the way, codon comes from the triplet of base pairs in the DNA, then mRNA sequence. They never interact chemically. So to be like, it's just chemicals is dumb to make that argument, especially when it's well substantiated and understood and taught that they don't interact. And for case in point, this is directly from an MIT lecture on this exact topic.
So a triplet code with 4 bases covers everything we need here. Okay, we have start codons and stop codons we have to keep in mind, listed here. Okay, and as a reminder, right, in translation, the amino acids are delivered by the amino acyl tRNAs. Okay, so the mRNA does not recognize these amino acids directly. We need the tRNAs that allows this reading to occur.
I mean, I don't know how much more direct a professor can be about what must be accounted for, except we have people like the one and only Godless Engineer who claims that it's not something that must be addressed, whether from a micro or a macro evolutionary perspective. It's not really information. We can interpret it as information. How in the flying what can you interpret something as information if it is not information? Data becomes information when it has meaning. So how does it, like, that's a standard position in the whole communication theory, all that kind of stuff. So how do you make the leap from we can interpret something if it doesn't already have meaning? And how can it be information that you're interpreting if it doesn't actually exist? And it's just chemicals that are read, that are code, that are interpreted by adapters, i.e. tRNAs, that are utilized by the ribosome in order to, and multiple other components, by the way, to read the data that's now information that has meaning, as value, arbitrary value assignments to it, which makes it equal to something, another substance that it does not chemically interact with, when you're going to claim that it's nothing but chemical reactions of a bunch of chemicals that aren't actually code, even though they're designated as code, taught as code, recognized to be code, but then they're not really. It's amazing, folks. I mean, it's like, how did they come up with a codon table and define it like this? How can you have exact same type of codon table and it be binary representations versus the chemical, the letters of the English alphabet, which are then equal to the either the codon or the amino acid? Like, how do you do these translations if that's not what it actually is? Like, it's not that difficult. Unless you're desperate to avoid the obvious, none of this is that difficult to comprehend. And anyway. All right, well, folks, if anybody wants to join, link is pinned. But I'm going to... Kelvy says that, no offense, but this sounds like some commie gook. Yes, that's right, Kelvy. I am a commie, and I am spewing a bunch of double talk and channeling my inner George Orwell to make sense of all this. It's bad. It's so bad. All right, so I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes. If nobody wants to join the stream for some little discussion, I'm gonna wrap it up because then I gotta prepare for to moderate what will probably be dumpster fire tonight over on SFTs. So I join the stream here. Oops, that's not what I was trying to post. There we go. All right, if anyone wants to jump in, there is the link. And Jungle's coming in. What's up, Jungle? How you doing?
What's up, John?
Oh man,
how's Tennessee?
Tennessee's good. I finally got out for the first time in a week and went down, picked up my daughter, and we had some ice cream. Just good times. Now I'm back in repose. I pushed myself about as far as I could on my ankle today, but back resting once more.
That's good. How's it? Is it still black and blue, or is it getting better?
Oh man, but my foot is basically green right now.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
It's better than it was for sure, but it's still not 100%. And it's actually kind of weird. Like when I stand up, if I'm standing still, it starts to hurt horribly, even if I'm not leaning on it at all. It like hurts. But if I'm walking, and then for a couple minutes after that, it'll hurt when I'm walking, and then like won't hurt as long as I'm gentle with it. But it's very bizarre that it hurts when I stand still and don't lean on it.
Yeah,
it's weird.
That would be probably the circulation is helping it.
Oh, I would imagine so, because it's black and blue on the side, and then like the top part of my foot's basically it looks green. It's obviously it's blue, but it's showing through the skin, so it looks kind of green from a color standpoint. But it's
that's one thing I never had a big problem with, and I'm thinking it because I used to wear cowboy boots, and it would always my ankle would always buckle because of the the heels. But I'm thinking that I kind of got used to that happening, and every time it buckles, I just let it buckle, and so I never had a problem with getting sprains on the ankle.
I did. Well, you also probably had the cowboy boot itself was probably giving you a little bit of support, and usually the sprain is the fast roll of it versus the slow roll. So even if the cowboy boot was just slowing down the roll slightly, it probably would have been preventing the actual sprain itself, would my guess.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Or at least a component of it, perhaps. Like maybe you recognize you both learning to like go with the roll versus try to resist it, as well as if it was slowed down enough, you might be it might have been giving you the ability to avoid the actual injury itself. I can see that for sure.
Because I thought that the cowboy boot would keep you from learning how to walk right. It would keep you from supporting your ankle properly because it would support it, but turns out it's not that much support, really. I mean, it's a little bit support, but it happens quite often, so you're kind of used to it happening, and you just let it go. That's what I think happens,
I could definitely see that. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I feel lucky. It's first sprain I've had in probably a solid 15 years, so I'm not. I'll take it as okay. Well, first real injury other than brain surgery. That's the only real injury I've had in, probably 15 years. So I'm not.
But as a basketball player, you might have like a different conditioning for your ankle or something. It has to kind of like hold. It can't be buckling all the time or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, and Patrick is talking about. I was playing basketball when I sprained my ankle. You could hear the ligaments tearing when it happened. Brutal. Yeah, I mean, I was a hardcore basketball player, and I don't know how many times I sprained my ankles in high school, but yeah, it's brutal. Oh, George, thanks for the super chat. Says, I have a solution for your ankle, John. Cut it off. Yeah, hopefully it'll heal pretty quickly. Hey, so George, sidebar. I don't know. I think I sent it to you. If I didn't, let me know and I'll send it back. The the Aussie Cossack got arrested last night, but they let him out. Apparently, there was like a big turnout at the police station to get him out and get him released. But he got his arrest on video. It was rather interesting to observe. Pigs Can Fly says, like that new video by LSS about loss of information. Hey, Pigs, who is LSS? I'm having a brain freeze on who that is. Kelby says, I did it trying to jump and clock my heels together like a fool, but I didn't know how bad it was and kept working. Nearly had to cut my shoe off. Yeah. Thankfully for me, I've rolled, because I've had enough sprains in my life, I knew I had it, and you get that very short window of opportunity to like get home and get elevation and start icing it. And thankfully, I knew to do that, because like by the time I got home, I was probably like maybe 20 minutes from my house, and by the time I got home, my shoe was like starting to get very, very tight. Put you that way. Getting that out, but. So what you been up to, Jungle? Am I hearing a fire in the background?
Yes, yeah, you are. I was going to say, don't pay attention to that crackle.
No, it sounded like fire. I thought, I was like, man, I think he might be sitting outside by a fireplace right now.
Yeah, I am, and it's
That's
nice too. And there's crickets too,
Hey man, it's a very calm sound for sure.
frogs.
Relaxing.
Yeah, it's all right. It's nice.
And now where you're at, there's not a bunch of like surrounding light, is there? Are you able to get a clean view of the stars and everything?
Yeah, I can. If it's not cloudy right now, yeah, I can. I can see the stars very, very clear. Yeah.
Nice. And let's see, we got any Goslins joined us. What's up going on? How are you? Hey, if you're talking, you're on mute. Annie, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I got to transfer to my Yeti. Be right there.
No problem. How are you? Welcome to the stream. I think this is this the first time you've been on my channel?
Yeah, but I've been listening to you for a bit.
Right on. Well, appreciate you joining. What's on your mind?
Give me like 5 seconds. Let me set up my Yeti.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem. No problem. Again, folks, anyways, just joining us, don't forget that about an hour from now, we will have the debate. There'll be a debate over on Standing for Truth between SFT himself and Crimson Air. They're going to be discussing can you lose your salvation? That should be a good one. And I'm actually going to be moderating that one. And they're calling it a soteriology showdown between the two types. So it should be fun to listen to, and hopefully they'll each be able to get some good back and forth, present some good concepts and doctrinal positions, and make strong cases for for both their positions. Should be fun. Haha, Jungle showing off the campfire, huh? I like it.
Yep.
So Jungle, is that a do you have a spot where you can like throw a burger on there, or a steak if you want to?
Absolutely.
Actually, I have one of those. It's in a box, but I bought it as part of my when the end of the world happens. I'm gonna have the ability to cook some stuff over the open fire, and not it's part of my bug out bag supplies.
Yeah, I got lots of fuel here.
Did you go get a bunch of like diesel or gas as well as firewood?
I have some gasoline, but yeah, I use the gasoline for my sawmill, and then when I want to start a fire, I just throw a little gas on there and whoosh.
Nice. Hey CJ, so yeah, I'm probably going to do an after show after the debate as well. Should be a good time. And that way. Hey, what's up, Soldier God? How you doing?
Good. I just want to say hi.
Appreciate you. Anything you want to bring into the conversation right away, or you just want to hop in? What's up?
I just wanted to see, have you guys ever like gone to like schools and like talked to students about this and like filmed it?
I haven't. I mean, obviously some people have. I haven't. What I'm actually working on right now, which I was actually planning to do before I sprained my ankle, is do kind of like a. Well, I identified a couple spots in some good like foot traffic areas to set up and like set up a table and stuff and like do a like some debate style. No, not debate style, but more like. Are you familiar with like Steven Crowder's "Change My Mind" concept?
Yeah.
I'm planning on doing the exact same logic, and I was going to do it over the summertime, but it was just so freaking hot here that I was like, man, this would not be fun to do in the blazing heat and humidity. Like I'm going to wait for the fall. And so I'm planning on doing it because I think it'd be kind of fun to do. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if having a table, I could get a big banner to go around and stuff. And I actually have one of those like pop-up covers, you can put on there. I think it'd be fun to do. And I'd be very surprised in a high foot traffic area if you don't get pretty significant interest, relatively quickly. And people willing to, a couple. What I've found in like different promotional stuff I've done over the years is usually only takes like one or two people, like one person to engage, and then crowds just congeal very rapidly. It's pretty fascinating.
Amen. Cool. All right, I'm gonna put my little guy to sleep, but I'm gonna listen to the debate and maybe see you in the after show.
Awesome, man. You have a great night.
You too, bye.
Let's welcome back, Annie. You're a gooseneck apologist, right? Same person. Did you get your Yeti working?
And then go to my.
You think you have 2 iterations on here. Let's see.
No, we're good now.
Okay.
I just had it on my phone. I was trying to get my laptop connected with the Yeti and.
Yeah, I got you. Yep, totally get it. I understand what you're talking about. How are you?
I'm well, dude. I love listening to your streams, though. You're freaking funny.
I appreciate it. Well, I mean, the irony is that, I've joked with SFT and Raw Matt, some of the folks about this, like offline. I've been like, man, you could do stand-up comedy routines, and all you'd have to do is just like regurgitate atheist talking points. And like, so yesterday I was having a conversation with an atheist. You won't believe what happened. This guy said that DNA was like Diet Coke. I mean, like, it's like you can't make this stuff up, But
I got a good solipsist joke for you.
All right, hit me.
A solipsist friend walks up to him and says, "I just learned what solipsism is." The solipsist turns to him and says, "What's that got to do with me?"
Yeah, I to be honest, I make fun of them sometimes and give them a hard time, but at many levels, I feel bad for a lot of them. Because
me too.
It's like, do you not grasp how much of the obvious that you're missing, as well as the amount of mental gymnastics that are necessary to justify or to semi-justify your worldview, which they oftentimes claim isn't a worldview. Anyway,
I don't know if you caught T Jump and J Robin.
I watched part of it. I saw part of it.
Dude, that was a dumpster fire. Like, just from the onset, T Jump's intro.
I came in probably, I think they've been going for like 30 or 40 minutes. I can only imagine what the opening was. I mean, the opening was him probably reading. He was probably reading something really, really fast, right?
No, it was just completely virtuously circular, and it hadn't it was. I'd have to pull it up again, but you listen to the intro. It's within the first minute of opening. And then like minute 40 through 55, it's just.
Let me see. So it's like at the very. Hang on.
Literally the very beginning.
Hang on, I'm gonna pull it up real quick. A second.
Sure.
Okay. What was the timestamp you were saying to look for?
There's a really bad portion, minute 40. I actually have it on my phone. I sent it to my friend to listen to.
Around minute 40. Okay, I got it. Let's see here.
I think it's like 40 or 43. I have to double check.
Okay. Well, I'll start a little bit before that. We'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay. T-Jump stuff is always entertaining.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here we go.
Nature are descriptions. They don't have any causal power.
No, laws of nature describe things that exist, and those things that exist can be
Correct.
fundamental, which have causal power.
Yeah. So what are those things that exist that are fundamental?
Laws of nature.
No, the laws of nature are descriptions. They don't exist.
Yeah, they describe
in
things.
that
They
sense.
describe literal things, and those things we use the word laws of nature to describe those things. Like if I ask what is God,
Right, so what
God is God. So I don't need to give any further description. Laws of nature are the necessary foundations of reality that describe everything. They are the preconditions of intelligibility. They explain morality, logic, and give everything that humans require for reason.
Okay, so what do the laws of nature describe?
I don't understand the question. Like, do you not know what
You just said the laws of nature. You just said the laws.
So one of the things about this so far that cracks me up is, I don't know if you, a couple months, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, he interviewed some PhD philosopher, and in this exact topic, T-Jump was regurgitating the same talking points he just did right there, and the PhD started laughing at him and told him he didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
Yeah, no, it gets worse too, because you know how he gets on people. It's like, well, you're just bringing up terms and definitions, but you're not actually justifying them in any way.
Yeah, let's get.
Yeah, he does the exact same thing. You've heard him talk about it before, yeah?
Oh yeah. There we go. This. Yeah, let's go.
Of nature.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
No, I want to let your. I don't want to speak for you. I want to ask you.
You have to answer the question. I ask, why can't the laws of nature, which do not entail consciousness, explain all of those things?
Because in the world where there is laws of nature and you just have them existing in a vacuum, then they're not grounded in anything. Okay, so that's why I want to know from you in your position.
That's not an argument. So that's an assertion. Like I can just say the same thing about God.
Yes.
In a world where God is, he has to be grounded by something. And where God exists in a vacuum, he has to be grounded by something.
Okay, that's why I want to know what grounds the laws of nature.
Nothing. So laws of nature are necessary, just like you think God is.
Okay, so do they describe things? And if so, what do they describe?
I don't need to answer that because that's not part of the question. So again, you claimed it's impossible.
It is part of the question.
No, it doesn't matter. So you claimed it's impossible for the laws of nature to ground all these things. You need to demonstrate that. Now, all you've said is, well, they must be grounded in something. Well, I can say God can be grounded in something. God must be grounded in something.
The laws of nature.
Let me finish the argument. So you asserted the laws of nature must be grounded in something. That's just you making shit up. Like I can assert God must be grounded in something. That's not evidence. So you would need to demonstrate that it is necessarily the case. The laws of nature can't explain all these things because they can.
Because the laws of nature don't.
So we don't even understand the true, like the origin of the laws of nature. However, T-Jump just said that they explain everything.
Yeah. No, but it's also funny because like this is really good starting point too, because if you listen to it later when he brings up the laws of nature again later, he says the laws of nature are grounded in reality.
Right. But right now he's saying they're not grounded
in anything.
Right.
And he doesn't have to answer that because it's not part of the question, even though that was the question that J. Robin asked.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about T-Jump and a lot of the other guys. Like they want to be so. It's where I came up with the whole joke about like the atheist hyper literalist disorder of like, oh, well, if you didn't issue a caveat on every single possible thing, I'm going to act like I'm an idiot and can't actually comprehend, even though you've delineated all this stuff prior to. I'm going to act like you didn't, or it's not applicable to this point that you're making in every single response sentence. Therefore, I'm going to completely dismiss the validity of your position. Like, well, how do you actually have conversation then? Like, there is no actual debate back and forth if you are going to either A, flip your position every time, or B, act like there was no definition of the position in the first place.
Yeah, and you'll hear it later on how Weasley, he's really clever with his rhetoric. You'll catch it later on if you listen carefully. Like, you've heard him talk about like how people sit there, well, you're just giving me terms and definitions, but you're not telling me where you're leading with those. You're not actually making an argument. You're just giving me terms and definitions. And later on he goes, well, my justification is grounded in my reasoning. My reasoning is grounded in my justification, which I get from a worldview, which things have to be differentiated between imaginary and real. I was like, okay, you didn't say anything.
Well, hey, listen, man. It could be farting pixies that are the underlying
Yeah.
cause of the universe. Like we know this. Like there's no separation between the premise of a farting pixie being the cause of the universe and like God and a farting pixie are definitely the same thing.
Also, by the way, this tag here is my Discord name.
Okay.
So if you're ever in Discord,
Gotcha. Gooseneck Apologetics, got it.
yeah, if
Got
you ever
it.
see me around.
I usually stay away from Discord, to be honest. I feel like Discord is degenerated into like just seething with, I don't know. It's got, every time I go over there, I'm like, oh yeah, I now remember why I stopped going to Discord.
There's some good people in there, like Matt Slick and Dart Dawkins and.
Oh, I'm not saying there aren't good people in there. I'm just saying like some of it's just. Yeah, no, but like you listen to a Darth Dawkins stream, and that stuff is just hilarious. It's like mute, okay, and it's like you're a blah, 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 blah. Okay, next. And then people wonder why Darth Dawkins is such a prick to people. It's like because he goes through 50 idiots to get to one person who's not quite being an idiot, and then within the first like 2 minutes starts to contradict themselves, claim they don't have to answer a question, or like refuse to actually address something. Well, I know what your next question is going to be, so I'm not going to answer your first one. Like,
yeah.
So you're saying that you're not going to follow a logical argument because you know what the next argument is and like what the conclusion will be. Therefore, you're going to refuse to substantiate whether premise one is correct or incorrect. Like, that's what you're saying.
I'm actually
okay.
I'm actually training up to actually have a debate with T-Jump at one point because I jumped in randomly one night. I didn't know who he was on Discord. He just came in and started talking to me. Within 10 minutes, they put me in backstage. They said, okay, enough of that. And I was like, but they have no response, no like complaint, no, just they couldn't answer. Because I didn't give a position. I just asked questions. And I showed them the holes in their logic and their fallacies. And it comes up later here, coming up in like between now and the 50-minute mark, where he actually admits the brain of vat paradox issue with his argument. And like he's a Monte Carlo shifting in all of his reasons and logic. This one's like a really good one though. It's like really apparent.
Interesting. Let's keep going.
Standing causal relation to anything. They are descriptions of things.
No.
Okay?
So the laws of nature.
Hold on, let me finish. Let me finish. No. You wanted me to let you finish.
You're strawmanning the position.
Well, I tried to ask. Okay,
you're strawmanning the position. I'm going to mute you. So when I say laws of nature, I'm referring to the thing themselves, not the description, the literal thing to which they are describing. Like if I say tree, I'm not talking about the word tree, I'm talking about the trees themselves. So laws of nature are the thing that exist. I don't need to give you any description other than they're not your God. That's all I need to say.
What are the laws?
I don't need to give you any further description other than you're not your God.
Well then, if you ask me why are the laws of nature inadequate, I want to know what that refers to.
No. You made the claim that they can't do it.
Listen, T-Jump.
You made the claim they can't do it, which means you have the burden of proof.
I'm not going to play this game with you.
No.
I want to know from you. If you tell me, listen,
dumbass, stop.
So they're 4 minutes and 48 seconds into this, and it's already dumpster fire.
Yeah, it's all good. It gets bad for about another 10 minutes, and then coming up on like the 43-minute mark to the 44, there's a whole section there.
All right, let's see. You said 43?
Yeah, 43.
Okay. Let's see.
And then the earlier part comes up in this. But if you notice, he said...
The word reality would still apply there. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
He brought up the whole laws of nature like T-Jump did. Well, I don't have to explain that. And he's like, well, that can't work by what is colloquially or commonly understood as the laws of nature. He's like, well, I don't have to explain it. He's like, well, it can't work. And he's like, well, if you're saying it can't work, you have the burden of proof to show us how they can't work. And that's a burden of negative. You can't put a burden of proof on a negative. So it's
that's what you say.
Well, that would be what would be logical, probable, and possible.
Well, that's I think you just need to stop making these assertions. Okay.
All right, bro.
So some property of reality, which is also called reality, is ultimate. So that's how words work.
Okay. You just told me reality equals everything in existence, correct?
Yes, and that's
Okay,
still
so
a composition division fallacy.
if reality refers to everything in existence, then you're telling me everything in existence
Nope,
is ultimate.
I've already corrected you on this. If you're too stupid to understand, that's your problem. So if I say reality and reality is ultimate, that means some property in reality is ultimate, and that's sufficient. That is sufficient.
Okay, so then so some property in reality is ultimate.
Sure.
Okay, what is this property in reality that's ultimate?
He's actually making an argument
for God. I need to for my argument.
T-jump is.
So then you don't actually have access to what it is that's ultimate in your position.
Yes, because I'm a part of reality. So
that doesn't mean you have access to what it is that's ultimate.
Yes, it does, because I can't not.
And that statement itself depends that there is an ultimate.
No, yes, it does. Yes, I can have access to the ultimate in reality because I can't both think I exist and not exist at the same time. Therefore,
you just told me you don't know.
The argument. So I can.
So you don't have access by definition.
Wait. So I can say I have access to some part, and that part is sufficient. And that part is that I can't both think I exist and not exist. And that whatever feature of reality instantiates that is something I have access to. And so I have access to the fundamental nature of reality, even though I don't need to know anything about it, other than it's that it instantiates that one fact. So I can say that knowing that there is some ultimate instantiates some indefeasible fact, gives me access to the ultimate, even that I don't need to know anything else about the ultimate, nothing else.
Okay. That's indifferential.
I don't need to know anything else about the ultimate.
Well, he's already appealing that there is an ultimate to reality, like a grounding foundation to all of existence. But then later on, if you play a little bit further, later on he goes into, well, I don't actually have to justify what that grounding is or even discuss it because it's actually not a part of my argument. Because he's already starting to lead to an appeal to God. And he stopped it short, like if you listen to it, like the argument.
What you just told me is indifferentiable from a world
not a word, but
where indifferentiable, yes it is. It can't be differentiated.
Indifferentiable?
Yeah, indifferentiable. It's not listen, you cannot differentiate between what you just told me, what you just verbalized, and a world where you exist spontaneously out of a realm of chance or out of a metaphysical void.
Well, it still exists.
Within that system, hold on a minute. Hold on. Within that system, there are no actual laws of logic, for example. Okay? There are no laws of nature. No, there aren't. There are, you may listen.
What you're saying doesn't make any sense. So wait.
You may within this. Let me finish.
I'm not understanding. I'm asking a clarifying question here. So you're saying that I can pop into existence, but somehow I can think I exist and don't exist?
Yes. And that in the worldview where there is a yes, I'm explaining it to you. I'm explaining it to you.
Please go ahead. Explain to me how I can think I exist and not exist at the same time. Go.
Because in the world that you're espousing, there are no laws of logic. It may be the case that locally you may have some laws that may have been established, but in the grand scheme of things, these things don't actually exist.
Okay, so
they just spontaneously came into existence, and they're not actually there. So your belief states
they spontaneously exist but don't exist.
Yeah, any state of affairs that you appeal to, any state of affairs that occurs is born out of chance. It's random. It's spontaneous.
But it exists.
That is indifferentiable. That's indifferentiable. Well, no, that's not necessarily the case. That wouldn't necessarily be the case either.
So they come into existence but don't exist.
Yeah, that would be perfectly fine within the worldview that I'm talking about, because what is ultimate doesn't exist. There is no ultimate.
Okay? I also think Robin dropped the ball here.
You have contradictions. You have
how
incoherency.
No, well, what you're.
Yeah, to an extent he did, but at the same time, it's like what I find funny about T-Jump's response there, because I agree, like obviously you can exist and think you not exist at the same time. Like that is obviously contradiction. But like that's
if I may say, there's a biblical word called similitude, and it sounds to me like you are trying to describe what that is. And it is meant to be confounding, and you will find it very frustrating to try to really describe or define what the similitude are.
I can see that.
Because I called him out on this before, because when T-Jump tends to argue these things, he tends to fall into the brain in the vat paradox within his argumentation. in his worldview because he shifts and switches so much. I actually called him out on before and then justified it, but I can't remember exactly what the conversation was, so I don't want to misrepresent.
Well, I mean, at this point, we are talking about somebody who thinks that there's no differentiation between two rocks banging together and computer code. So
yeah. I saw your video on
is
that.
There is that. I mean, that's why I find some of these guys, like, yes, they can occasionally make, solid arguments. Yes, they do. They're usually intelligent. Like T-Jump, I don't question the fact that T-Jump is an intelligent person. He's got IQ points, but he's so desperate to convince himself that God does not exist that he uses his intellect to create ridiculous noodles in his own mind. That somehow it's like, but you're actually not reaching any real conclusions. Like, by doing this, you are preventing yourself from actually reaching a rational conclusion. To your point, the head in a vat, and I don't know anything. I can't actually know anything because I may, the evil scientist may be manipulating me. It's like, if that's your position, like, I feel bad for you.
And later on, I don't remember where it's at because I didn't mark it, but he actually brings it up as if we can mess with, I can't remember what portion of the brain that relates to religion or like belief in God, a scientist can actually be poking you in the head. He actually brings that argument up later as if it's justifiable, while at the same time right now he's saying that can't happen. But
sidebar, what's interesting about the whole, the science can poke you in the brain and you can have out-of-body experiences, all that kind of stuff. I actually I just finished a book about a week and a half ago on the near-death experiences, and it was kind of interesting. In the book, this researcher who's very, very well known was basically explaining why that talking point is ridiculous and not actually substantiated. And in fact, the experimentation in no way, shape, form, or fashion reaches that conclusion. And I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like one of the studies about we can zap you in the brain and you have this action. I think it was like 1,000. The number in my head right now is 1,087. It was over 1,000 though. I think it was 1,087 people were part of the study, and of that, there were 2 that said they had some sort of experience, and of those 2, neither one of them ever claimed to have left their body. And yet, it is that experiment is very often used by atheists on YouTube, especially, to somehow dismiss the whole mind-body problem.
Yeah, no, the mind-body problem is still like out there. There is no, or the mind-brain issue, or the mind-brain issue. It's still out there, but they take it as, we have something to grab on. It's 1%. If you have 1%, I can deny everything that you're saying.
Yeah, well, in line with that, today, case in point, today, I don't know if everybody saw the over on Theology Unleashed, Matt Dillahunty was over there, and when they started talking about the whole mind-body problem to an extent, Dillahunty was just like, well, this is all understood. Like, we know how the brain works and the mind, where the mind comes from the brain. And he was like hyper confident in this exposition about how, that's no longer a question. And I'm like, it's becoming a bigger question by the day. As our technology is increasing, the
more we learn about it, the more we realize like how much it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
Well, that's the reason for it. There's other words that Jesus describes them as. An unlawful thing for man to know is one of those descriptions. Another one is the strange apparel. The other description of it is the similitude. I would only describe empirical knowledge, what I have actually experienced and seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. And in seeing those things, I have often been tempted into imaginations concerning it, or imaginations sort of influenced by it, which are totally vain. So what I have seen are things like a man on a street, and I'm on a bus in Chicago, and I am on the bus, and the bus is traveling at 10 miles an hour down Clark Street, and I see an old man, and then the bus is 4 or 5 blocks away, and then I see that same old man again. Another description would be I have seen people that had similarities to my deceased relatives, mother, father, grandfather, grandmothers, and they're always just a little bit tweaked. Something about them is different, and they do not say hello. They do not introduce themselves, and so that is the strange apparel form of similitude, and it is meant to confuse. It is meant to confound. Jesus is not the author of confusion, but it is meant to confound. And that's the kind of thing I've seen. I was roommating with a man named, I will not say because we left on very bad terms. And here, I was tempted to thinking he's an angel, but, he would go to the Pentecostal church on Sunday and play church organ. But then on Wednesday, when he'd get his government check, he'd go out and buy crack and do homosexual acts. And, I thought this was totally perverted, and it really put a wedge between us. And then one day he's in the house and I'm playing the piano. I was renting. He allowed me to be a renter in his house for a while. And he's in the house. And then, he walked out the front door, and then he's in the kitchen again. I did not see him vanish. I did not see him run around the house in half a second and appear in the kitchen. But that's what happened. I also saw this at a party in Chicago on the top floor of a skyscraper on a New Year's Eve party where I was drawing caricatures. And a young man that had sort of a nice suit on and kind of looked James Bondish in a way, like one of the bad James Bonds. And he walked into a room behind me, and I saw him go into the room. And then the next thing I know, I see him coming up the stairs. And I looked in that room where he walked into, and there were no windows and no doors for him to leave. So somehow or another, he vanished in that room and transported and appeared somewhere else in the house. And then he came up the stairs and stood next to me, leaning over a banister, nice loft penthouse, beautiful place, and just kind of smiled at me. And, it confounded me. It really confounded me. And that's what the similitude do. So
that's interesting, Wesley.
Those are the kinds of
Wesley, hang on. Let's play a little bit more of this T-Jump, and then we got to wrap up in the next 5 minutes because I got to get ready for the moderating the debate. So let's play a little bit more, and then we'll wrap up real quick.
That's all there about is to it. Where it's interesting at. Can you post in the sidebar the other channel?
Oh, for the debate?
Yeah, the one you're moderating.
Yeah, give me 1 sec here. Let's see.
Appreciate it.
Where the heck did I put that? I did that earlier. Let's see. Pretty interesting debate. Yeah, they're going to be discussing can you lose your salvation from a soteriology perspective, which I think should be a good topic. I'm sure it will turn into a dumpster fire at some point, either during the debate or in the after show, which I'm probably also going to host. Should be fun. Okay, so folks, I am posting link to so it's in 25 minutes. Link is coming into the side chat right now. Oh, and Cheryl came in at the same time as me, so there's now double links. Actually, I think on that note, folks, let's we'll kind of wrap things up and appreciate everybody joining and sticking through the madness that was the Godless Engineer. Oh man, that poor guy got absolutely obliterated, and he didn't even realize it. And she was so nice to him, and she just crushed him. It's epic.
That's kind of the cognitive dissonance you kind of saw going through with him. Trying to think it through, but couldn't work the gears together between what she was speaking about and what he was trying to railroad it into.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, he's an engineer, though.
Yeah, so the fact that he has a bachelor's in computer engineering and a master's in software engineering, and somehow thinks that the genetic code is not a code. I just don't get it. Your point about cognitive dissonance is 100% true. Like he has to have refused to actually go and look at the plethora of things that have been put in his face by yours truly, as well as many others that completely annihilate his position on that. And there's no way he's actually read them. I mean, if he has, you can't You cannot. Like if you can do a direct application of code theory, and there's papers on it, one of which I showed him, of how it was. I think the title of the paper was "How Code Theory Applies to the Genetic Code." It's like, how can code theory apply to the genetic code if it's not a code? Like it's physically, like, it's impossible to do so. And anyway, hey, what's up, Kelby? How you doing?
Hey, good evening.
You got anything real quick you want to add? Because we're about to actually, you know what? You guys can keep going.
Yeah,
if you guys want to keep talking, if you guys want to keep talking for a few minutes, I'm going to step away, and then I don't have to kill it right this second. If you guys want to keep talking, you can. Then I'll be back in a couple minutes. I have to get ready for the debate.
Yeah, check out the rest of the video that I told you about. Yeah, I think you'll like it. Might give you some content.
Yeah, for sure. I will. Yeah, Kelby, you guys can keep talking for a couple minutes. I'll be back in a second if you guys want to keep going.
Have any of you guys seen things like that? Maybe a deceased relative that appeared, or you didn't see him appear, but they looked somewhat physically different, but you kind of got the hint that it was them in some way.
Yeah, you know, stuff like that is more like trusting your. You know, some people say they had a feeling and therefore they started believing a certain thing because of a feeling that they had. You know, and a lot of Christians will say, well, then you should believe in what you read in Scripture and what your faith is, and instead of your personal feelings. So I think that same thing would apply to your senses, as in what you're describing there specifically.
How did you feel about it? I mean, like if you saw, you know, your mom.
Well, that's
come
the
back
problem,
again,
because
but
the
it wasn't really looking
can
exactly
appear.
like her.
The devil appears as an angel of light. You know, so we can't trust what we see anyway. That's why we just have to know.
It's a yellow light.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter, you know, because I could be colorblind and still see the same light and be affected in the same way. I mean,
I call it the rancid butter light.
How we know truth, which is knowing God through His Word, and not through our sight or through what we're seeing, through what rooms we're in, and what kind of spatial whatever we're seeing different people go in. You know, so otherwise it becomes a distraction, right? And that's exactly what he's trying to do.
Well, that's one of his great tricks is getting attention to him.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's where I'm wondering on this debate, you know, because this guy, and this right here is like the third time I've ever gone on to a live stream, and the first time I ever did it was on this standing for truth, or standing on, what is it, standing on Scripture?
Yeah, standing on the promises.
And he's a very ardent non-Trinitarian, and I assume most of the people here are Trinitarians.
Well, who is
the guy the one guy in the debate that's coming up?
Okay.
What's his name? Standing.
No, standing for truth is it?
No, not standing for truth. The other, or is it standing for truth himself? That's I thought it was the other guy.
Yeah, standing for truth.
Okay, I'm thinking of the guy. Oh, okay.
Standing on the promises.
Well, that's cool.
What do you mean he's not a Trinitarian?
No. I was thinking there's another guy called Standing on Scriptures or something like that. And I had just saw a live stream from his channel, and I was thinking that was okay. So yeah, I'm totally wrong on that. So
well, no, I'm saying like when you say he's not Trinitarian, are you saying he's modalist or what?
No. I'm saying I was talking about completely a different person.
No, I know. I understand that. I'm talking about the person you meant to be talking about.
Well, he did a debate recently against the Trinity, actually specifically about the angel of Yahweh was God or was Jesus.
Is that Praise I Am? Praise I Am? Is that the one you're talking about?
No. Specifically, his channel is. I was just on it because there is stand on Scripture. That's that guy's channel, and he was a non-Trinitarian. He identified himself as a Unitarian Messianic, but the gist of his argument boiled down to like if God was like speaking to you on the phone, you could worship the phone. Is pretty much their argument as far as I could break it down, which I think is pretty absurd.
Yeah, but the phone is not God, though.
Yeah, exactly. But in their view, because if God is speaking through something, but because they deny that Jesus is in the same is Yahweh, basically.
Have you
Oh,
looked?
but everything is of God. Everything is by the power of God. So Jesus is God. So
Yeah, he did create everything. He created good and evil for his purposes.
no, he brings evil. He brings evil. He doesn't cause evil.
By creating, he must create that something must happen that's not him. Anything not him, ultimately, I could define as evil if it itself is having some sort of a type of awareness of what it's doing. Because a rock falling on top of a puppy, you can't really. I mean, I don't know if you would call that evil, but it's certainly not good. But can we even say that it's not good without somebody there to whine about it?
Well, I'm not trying to say I'm good, that's for sure.
Amen.
Sorry, I don't remember your name. Corey, was it?
Wesley Lawrence Curry II.
No, not the guy to your left. The icon to your left.
I have an IY chromosome, an I1Y chromosome. So
Well,
that's a dissonance.
I do have a biblical resume. If you look in Leviticus, there is scripture that says a sacrifice of the second in the manner, and also in Zephaniah, the howling of the second. And believe it or not, that is me, the second, Wesley Lawrence Curry II.
Oh, the Howling.
Sacrifice.
That's a movie, right? The Howling.
The howling, yeah. I get really frustrated and angry, and I howl like a barking dog chasing a limousine back tire spinning around in my mouth.
It's all right if you're in the woods. You can do that if you're in the woods. But the neighbors probably still hear you, though.
That's right. Your name is Jungle.
Quayo, I think it was. How you say it?
Yeah, I'm in the jungle. I'm in the woods. Yeah.
I was going to say Quayo. Have you looked into the difference in psychological and social trinity models?
Let's see if my Trinity. Yeah. I don't really know what that is.
It just talks about the nature between the Trinity partnership. There's social Trinitarianism and psychological Trinitarianism.
You mean like is God is God's three persons like a mind, or different types of like what they are? Like what's their particular essence?
At different places and different times.
Between an eternal being.
Well, essentially, the only two brought up since like Augustine on for Trinitarianism, except for the Ante-Nicene fathers like Origen and now the names escape me, where they believed in like an emergent property of the Holy Spirit and the Word from the Father, where the later Trinitarianism was
in time and space,
psychological and social models.
In limited time and space.
So you mean the fact that the Father speaks a word and then the word has information, like because that has some sort of a sequence that doesn't really equate with an eternal property?
Yeah.
It wouldn't not be eternal. It would just be
because it's not necessarily a call. Because if there was ever a point where the Father was not speaking and the word wasn't by the breath of Yahweh, then I might have room to agree with you. But because
I'm just saying, we looked into it.
Doing what he's doing all the time, which is basically the meaning of his name, is that that's just that. I mean, it's not. It sounds like a cop out, but that's just he is how he is.
I have a more of a personal leaning to the Antifathers, Trinitas. I'm trying to think of his name.
Well, I think I came by this specific understanding from reading Theophilus of Antioch, and a lot of people say that I started looking in at like that view because it's also shared by Irenaeus and these early guys, where they don't call it like
Irenaeus.
Obviously, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit's there, but they say the Father, the Word, and the Wisdom. But I can see when you start saying it like that, people will start looking at them as forces rather than actual people that you can interact with as persons, because in my view of persons, the whole meaning of a person is something that another person can interact with.
The problem is that wisdom is one of the spirits of God, which is the one of the 6 spirits of God, excluding the Spirit of the Lord.
So that God is a sextity or whatever?
No, in other words, wisdom is not the spirit
Sectinity.
of God. Wisdom
Well,
is
actually, it's
wisdom is given to everybody.
6 plus the word, and then the Father.
Wisdom is available to everybody, but the spirit of God has to be, illuminating all the other spirits of God.
Yeah, but the
Yeah,
people
but I
I was
don't think
talking about.
the
Hey,
spirit
guys.
of God is segmented like
Hey,
that.
Hey guys, we need to wrap up. It's I gotta head over and get ready to mod, and so I just posted a link in the chat again, folks. Head on over to Standing for Truth channel for the debate between SFT and Crimson Air on Can You Lose Your Salvation? Soteriology Showdown. I want to say thanks very much to everybody who joined the after show and for everybody who was watching through my rant on Godless Engineer's discussion with Catherine, I believe her name is. Appreciate you guys coming, and I will be doing an after show, and I'll be posting links for that in the side chat over on SFT's channel. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it, and hope to have more conversations in the not too distant future.
Okay.
I'll be and reoccurrent from now on LPP.
Awesome.
All right, brother.
All right, go. All right, folks.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Wesley. All right, guys. Let's have a good one, and I will see everybody here in just a few.